Good morning and welcome to the 13th Annual Santa Barbara Botanic Gardens Conservation Symposium. We're here today to discuss how we can all plant with purpose by specifically using native plants to strengthen our landscapes, our ecology, and our lives. I want to thank all of you here today, both in person and online, our incredible group of speakers, and especially this year's generous sponsors, including the Nakashima Rennie family, Blackbird Architects, Christian and Melissa Stephian, Cox Communications, and Newshawk. This year marks the garden's 100th anniversary. We've been a leader in horticulture, research, education, and conservation. And as many of you know and are already aware, we also run the best native plant garden in the nation and the oldest native plant garden in the nation. For over a century, we've championed California's native flora, its crucial role in sustaining wildlife, healthy ecosystems, and resilient communities. To celebrate that century of impact, we are inviting everyone to join us as part of the native plant movement. Whether you are adding native plants to your yard, volunteering for local restoration projects, or helping spread the word with friends and neighbors, your action matters. Thank you. I want to invite you, let me go back one more. I want to invite you to scan this code either now, or this will also be online later on, or go to our website to download a variety of free resources we've developed to help you protect biodiversity. There is something that everyone can do to help. And to get you started as you're leaving today, we're going to be able to provide you with a native plant, either a shrub or a California poppy, to get you going on that journey. As we set our sights on the next 100 years, it's my pleasure to also introduce Dr. Heather Schneider, our new Director of Conservation and Research. Heather has led our rare plant conservation team at the garden for nearly a decade and has recently taken over the reins of our entire conservation program, leading a team of 25 scientists committed to advancing native plant knowledge from genes to entire ecosystems. You'll hear from her a little later today, but thank you for joining me in welcoming her. Finally, it is my honor to announce that this year's Honorable John C. Pritzlaff Conservation Award recipient. This award recognizes individuals whose leadership and impact have significantly advanced conservation and environmental stewardship, inspiring action at both the local and oftentimes global levels. This year, we are proud to recognize another true leader in native plant conservation and someone who is actively working to inspire everyone to plant with purpose. And, we'll come back to that one. That person is Dr. Doug Tallamy. Doug is an ecological yes? Doug is an ecological entomologist, professor at the University of Delaware, and a New York Times best-selling author with books like Nature's Best Hope and Bringing Nature Home. His work has inspired millions to rethink our relationship with landscapes and has seen native plants as essential partners in halting biodiversity loss. He has done this in a way that includes, but goes beyond, what traditional academic researchers have done. Let's learn a little bit more about why we're recognizing Doug today.
When I started my Ph.D. back in 2013, there was a little bit of interest in native plant gardening, but it was really just kind of siloed in these like extra specialized organizations. And actually, before I started my PhD, my other collaborator was like, you gotta meet this guy, Doug. I think you guys would work together really well. And I was like, who's Doug? Like, who's Doug Tallamy?
Doug was one of the early people across the nation that figured out that there was a real connection between native plants and insects and birds. We all knew that intuitively. Doug was able to document that, and then he shared that in a way that went beyond just publishing peer-reviewed articles.
Yeah, Doug Tallamy is a leader in discussing native plants, based at the University of Delaware, entomologist. He's a friend of mine, professor of mine, just a wonderful human being.
When Doug started, he was a behavioral ecologist and asked all these like esoteric questions about evolution and things like that. And as he went further in being a scientist and being an entomologist, he sort of realized, how we're affecting the world and seeing declines and seeing like the degradation and the changes that are happening over his lifetime. And while, some scientists might go down the doom and gloom pathway, he actually went in the opposite direction and started thinking about what we can do and using the observations that he was making in his own yard to sort of lead the trajectory of the rest of his science.
One thing that Doug has done that is really unique for most scientists is to speak to people in a way that they both understand and connect with. Doug is a prolific author with a popular audience. He's even adapted one of his books for children.
Doug has done a lot of wonderful books that have all had their unique focus and different content. And then when The Living Landscape came out, that book is still selling really well. I can't believe it because it's a 2014 book. That's the first time that I ever actually, from the outset, did a co-written book. We really wanted to do a book that was authentic, that we knew every photograph that was in there. We knew the background on it, so we're not making up anything. The combination of the two of us together was the ideal situation where we could have all these concepts and that we could show people what these landscapes we're talking about could look like.
When Doug gives talks, he likes to give people like really concrete examples and anecdotes of ways that they can make a difference. And for many, many years, he talked about how our yards are small, but in aggregate, they can cover this huge area more than all the national parks in the United States. It was just kind of like a quip that he said.
When my husband and I left New York City and moved to Connecticut, our neighbors advised us that we had a neglected garden. They encouraged me to go to a talk where this man was speaking named Doug Tallamy. He started to talk about the loss of biodiversity to overdevelopment and loss of habitat. And I was thinking at the time that I would just get up and leave because I didn't want another bad human moment. But before I could even think of doing that, he said, and there's such a simple solution. And that was the beginning of my realization that you don't have to be a gardener for a living or even a hobby to be part of the solution by planting native and removing invasive plants.
People heard that message and felt really inspired and felt really like there's a movement here, but we don't really know how many people are a part of this movement. And so they started this nonprofit named Homegrown National Park.
Homegrown National Park was really a term coined by him at least 25 years ago. We launched our website in 2020. So what we are is a movement to get people aware of the biodiversity crisis and then to commit to being part of the solution. We have this interactive map where you can put your intention or your plantings or what you already have planted. And this is for everyone to do, whether you're a business, an individual, a conservation nonprofit with a lot of members. The Homegrown National Park Biodiversity Map shows that individually we're making an impact and collectively we're solving the biodiversity crisis.
Doug's influence is a huge part for the reason that I am the scientist that I am today, and I'm just really grateful that I've had the opportunity for my life to intersect with his.
The opportunity to have gotten to know Doug and to have worked meaningfully with him and to produce that book and lecture together, it's been one of life's great joys, no question about it.
There's not many people like Doug around. He's making a bigger difference than any other academic I know in regards to supporting and promoting native plants.
With that, please, Doug, come join me up on stage and receive your award. We cut a diamond for you, of course. And it's worth noting, Doug saw that video for the very first time. In fact, he didn't even know we were doing it, so it was kind of fun. I'm sorry to spring it on you, but it was fun. Doug, thank you for your commitment to native plants, biodiversity, and ecological stewardship, and thank you for joining us today. And thank you all for joining us today now the stage is yours.
Thank you.
Uh-oh.
How much did you pay those people to say all those things?
It was a modest investment.
Yeah, yeah. I learned a lot about Doug Tallamy. That was interesting. Actually, I said, we're celebrating our 100th year anniversary. We've got to find somebody who looks like he's 100 years old.
People tell me I do.
Whose teeth are falling out, who can't hear, can't see, who's shrinking. Keith said, I know just the guy. Okay, all right, enough of that. If I go like this, yes. All right, I talk about nature's best hope quite a bit, and I give you a spoiler, you're nature's best hope. So I'm really going to talk about why I think you're nature's best hope. Before I do that, though, let's talk about what E.O. Wilson's idea of nature's best hope was. Of course, the late E.O. Wilson, probably the most famous and productive scientist Harvard has ever turned out. Extremely long career. And he was an entomologist, too, by the way. But one of the things that was consistent throughout his very long career was his love of life on planet Earth and his efforts to save it. And he wanted to save it not just because he loved it, but because he knew it was essential to our own survival. So in 2016, I guess I got ahead of myself, he wrote that book, Half Earth, Our Planet's Fight for Life, and he had one simple message. He said, if we're going to save life anywhere on planet Earth, we're going to have to save nature. We're going to have to save functioning ecosystems on at least half of the planet, or it will disappear everywhere, and that includes humans. It was a very bold statement, and he spent most of the book talking about the science that supports that very bold statement, and then he ended the book. He didn't spend a lot of time telling us how we were going to save nature on half of planet Earth. Of course, to a conservation biologist, that's a great idea. Let's put half the Earth aside, and all those things that are in trouble can be in that half. We'll be in the other half, and it'll be great. Problem is that half of terrestrial Earth is already in some form of agriculture, and I don't see that disappearing anytime soon. And we have now 8.3 billion people in the other half, along with all of our roads and airports and hardscape and detritus, and we don't have a third half to put aside for nature. So how can we realize E.O. Wilson's dream? That's really what I want to talk about today, and I think we can, but we need a new approach to conservation to do that. Before we talk about that, though, let's talk about oak mass. Oak's one of my favorite plants, you know. Every once in a while, they get together and decide they're going to make their acorns at the same time. And this is what it looks like when they do that. Well, I'm easily entertained. So I take one of those acorns, and I just stare at it. And sometimes I'm rewarded. An insect starts to chew its way out of the acorn, chews a little hole for its head, then it forces its head through there, then it forces its entire body through that hole. It's a tight squeeze, and once it's out of the acorn, it's a dangerous time for that insect larva because it's good to eat. A lot of things are after it. So it gets to safety by wiggling and squirming beneath the soil surface. That takes about 30 seconds. And once it's underground, it stretches in all directions and forms a chamber. And then within that chamber, it converts itself to a pupa, and surprisingly stays in that underground chamber as a pupa for 2 years. After 2 years, comes out as an acorn weevil. That's what a weevil looks like. A lot of people think weevils have big noses because it looks like they do, but that's actually an extension of the head capsule, and the mouth parts are way down there at the end of that extension. They take those mouth parts, chew a hole into the center of the acorn, turn around, lay an egg in it, and that is how the larva gets into the acorn. Why do they spend 2 years underground? Why don't they come out the next year the way most insects would? Well, it takes acorns, the red oak group, many of the species of acorns, 18 months to complete their development. So if they come out the next year, there wouldn't be enough acorns for them. Of course, after they leave the acorn, it leaves a hole. It's kind of like a true vacuum. You know that nature abhors a vacuum. And in this case, she's filled it with 3 species of temnothorax ants, tiny little ants where the entire colony lives in the holes made by acorn weevils after they left the acorn. And if scouts find a new hole in a new acorn, they get all excited because their old acorn is falling apart. So I tell everybody it's time to move. Grab the larvae, grab the eggs, move the entire colony into the new acorn. That takes about 30 minutes. And once they're in there, they post a guard, make sure nobody else comes in. And that's where they live for the next 2 years until that acorn falls apart. What's my point with this little story? That's just one of literally millions of very specialized relationships, largely between animals and plants, that comprise the bulk of nature. This is another one, the relationship between jays and acorns. Jays are the primary disperser of oak acorns. They'll take an acorn, fly up to a mile, sometimes a mile and a half from the parent tree, tap it below the surface of the soil, and the object is they're going to go back in the wintertime and have something to eat. But for every 4 acorns they bury, they only remember where one is. So for every 4 acorns they bury, they've actually planted 3 oak trees. And a single jay can bury 4,500 acorns every fall. Specialized relationship between pileated woodpeckers and carpenter ants. That's what they rear their young on, carpenter ants. So you won't have pileated woodpeckers unless you have a lot of carpenter ants, and you won't have a lot of carpenter ants unless you have the big trees that make those carpenter ants. You won't have the beloved emarginia, that beautiful moth, unless you have mistletoe, and that's their host plants, what the larva feeds on, and you won't have mistletoe unless you have the big oaks that support that mistletoe. You won't have about 100 species of bees in California unless you have the pollen of perennial sunflowers. Turns out that pollen specialization is very common in our native bees. We've got almost 4,000 species of native bees, and over a third of them can only reproduce on the pollen of particular plants. So if you take away sunflowers, you lose 100 species of bees. So nature is a group of specialized interactions. The point I want to make here today is that actually most of these interactions today are in trouble. Nature itself is on the ropes. And it's on the ropes because we didn't take Teddy Roosevelt's advice. Way back in 1908, Teddy heard that the state of Arizona was going to mine the Grand Canyon. So he went to the canyon, looked out over the edge, and he said, "Leave it as it is." And with those 5 words, he started the process of creating the Grand Canyon National Park. Well, we didn't leave most of it, particularly the lower 48 states, as it was. There's only about 5% that's anything close to its original pristine ecological condition. And those are typically mountaintops. And that's because we have logged the country repeatedly. We have tilled it. We have drained it. We have grazed it. We got 770 million acres of rangeland out there. That's 4.5 times the size of Texas, dedicated to cattle. And of course, we paved it or otherwise developed it. We have straightened our rivers and dammed them. You can spell that any way you want. We've polluted our skies, changed our climate for centuries to come. We have drained our aquifers. We've introduced more than 3,300 species of plants from other continents, many of which are running amok in our natural areas. In short, we've carved up those natural areas into tiny remnants of their former selves. And each one of those remnants is too small and too isolated to sustain the amount of nature needed to sustain humans. Edwin Wade Teal decades ago said we cannot make the world uninhabitable for other forms of life and have it habitable for ourselves. It's the most basic common sense. Yet that is, in fact, what we have been doing. We're continuing to do that, and you might wonder why. I don't know. But I suspect we thought that the earth, our nest, was so large, we could foul it forever and there wouldn't be any consequences. But of course, that's not true. And that's why we're seeing some really scary headlines these days at a pretty regular clip. So something like the insect apocalypse is here. What does it mean for the rest of life on Earth? Talking about global insect decline. Followed by this one, North America's lost 3 billion breeding birds in the last 50 years. A third of our North American bird population already gone. The UN is predicting we're going to lose 1 million species to extinction in the next 20 years. And they made that prediction 3 years ago. So now I guess it's the next 17 years. It's a prediction. It hasn't happened yet. And we have to make very sure it doesn't happen because these are the species that run the ecosystems that we all depend on. It is serious stuff. So I could go on talking about the pox that we humans have delivered upon the environment, and as Shakespeare would say, upon all of our houses. But that's not what this talks about. This talks about a cure for that pox. It's a cure that'll take small efforts from lots of people like you and me, but those efforts will deliver enormous physical, psychological, and environmental benefits to everybody. Let's return briefly to this headline. The insect apocalypse is here. What does it mean for the rest of life on Earth? Back to E.O. Wilson. He told us what would happen if insects were to disappear from Earth, and he did it way back in 1987 with this paper, The Little Things That Run the World. And again, his message was very clear. Life as we know it depends on insects. And if they were to disappear, lots of nasty things would happen. 90% of our flowering plants would disappear. And if that happened, that would so drastically change energy flow through our terrestrial ecosystems that the food webs that support our vertebrate animals would collapse. We would lose our amphibians, our reptiles, our birds, and our mammals. The biosphere, the living portion of the earth, would rot because we would have lost insect decomposers that rapidly turn over nutrients, and all we would have is bacteria and fungi. And again, humans wouldn't survive any of those drastic changes. Now, there is good news, and that is that none of that has to happen. We can save our insects, we can save our birds, we can save nature itself, but we're going to have to change the way we landscape to do it. Why is that? Well, remember, humans are products of nature. We are totally dependent on the life support that ecosystems provide. We call them ecosystem services. These are just a few things that plants do that we depend on every day, like produce oxygen, pretty important, clean our water. You know, when it rains, the water's rushing to the sea. Well, plants slow down that journey to the sea, and once it's in the ocean, it's too salty to use. They're cleaning the water as it goes. Carbon capture, enormously important today. Plants are pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, out of harm's way, building their tissues out of that carbon. And they fix more carbon through photosynthesis than they can use, so they pump the extra carbon into the ground through their root systems. And once it's in the ground, it's extremely stable. Plants are building topsoil, they're holding it in place, they're preventing floods, they're dampening severe weather, they're converting sunlight into food. If we lose our plants, we're going to have to eat sunlight, and then we will lose weight. What are animals doing for plants? Lots of things, but mostly providing pest control services. They're pollinating nearly 90% of our flowering plants, dispersing plant seeds. So designing landscapes like this that destroy the production of ecosystem services is just not a good idea. Never was a good idea, but today it's a terrible idea because of those 8.3 billion people demanding more and more ecosystem services every day. Now, we do have parks, we do have preserves, they're doing the best they can, but it's not good enough. We're rapidly heading towards the 6th great extinction event the planet has ever experienced. So I think the solution is to start to practice conservation outside of parks and preserves on landscapes just like this. Now, there have been visionaries through the ages who've recognized that we humans needed to work on our relationship with planet Earth, and Aldo Leopold was one of the most eloquent. He wrote extensively in the first half of the 1900s. One of the things he said is the oldest task in human history is to live in a piece of land without spoiling it. There have been indigenous groups been able to do that for long periods, but our huge Western societies and our huge Asian societies are terrible at doing that. We habitually take more from the earth than it has to offer, completely wrecking an area, going to another area, doing the same thing, not sustainable behavior. But Aldo Leopold had a lot of faith in humans. He believed we were capable of developing what he called a land ethic. He knew we had to use the land. We had to farm and graze and lumber and mine and do all of those things. But he believed we could learn to do them gently enough that we did not destroy local ecosystems. That's what he called a land ethic, and he wrote about it in the Sand County Almanac, his most famous book. What he did not write about was developing a land ethic where we actually lived. And I'm not sure why that was, but I suspect the notion that humans and nature cannot live together, cannot coexist in the same place at the same time. That notion was so deeply embedded in the culture of Aldo Leopold's day, still remains in our own culture. He might not have recognized it as an option. What I want to argue today, though, is not only is living with nature an option, it is now the only viable option that's left to us. In the past, of course, conservationists worked pretty much exclusively where there weren't a lot of people. We now need to turn that on its head and practice conservation where there are a lot of people, because that's pretty much everywhere. And that means we've got to find ways for nature to thrive in human-dominated landscapes. Not hang on by a thread, not get diminished every day, but thrive. Where should we start? Private property, because most of the country is privately owned. 78 to 80%, depending on which website you look at, of the lower 48 states is privately owned. 85.6% east of the Mississippi is privately owned. If we don't practice conservation on private property, we're going to fail, and failure is not an option. When you use the word conservation, I'm not using it exactly the way I mean. We do want to conserve any bits of nature that are left out there. That's been our conservation model for the last century, and we want to keep doing that. But again, it's not good enough, so we have to go beyond conservation into restoration. We have to start to rebuild functional ecosystems in as many places as possible. And if you're thinking, well, there's no way you're going to put it back together again the way it was, you are probably correct. We have changed too many things. But we can reunite enough of those specialized interactions that I opened the talk with to create ecosystem function again, even if it's not exactly what was in a particular space at some point in the past. But in order to do that, we have to start with the building blocks. Not all species contribute to ecosystems equally. So we have to start with the most powerful groups. And there's two groups we can't do without. One is the flowering plants. And of course, the pollinators that allow those plants to reproduce. They're capturing energy from the sun and through photosynthesis, turning it into the food, the simple sugars and carbohydrates that supports just about all the animals on the planet. So now we have all the food that animals need locked up in plant tissues, mostly leaves. If you don't get that food to animals, you don't have any animals. And if you don't have any animals, you don't have functional ecosystems. Well, it turns out that most vertebrates don't eat plants directly. Most vertebrates eat invertebrates that ate plants. Most of those invertebrates are insects, and not just any insect. Turns out that caterpillars are enormously important in terms of transferring energy from plants to animals. They're transferring more energy from plants to animals than any other type of plant eater. So if we design landscapes that don't have a lot of caterpillars in them, we're going to have failed food webs and eventually failed ecosystems. I think there are a couple of slides here. We lost a couple of slides. I'm going to give you an example with the Carolina chickadee. That is the chickadee that is in my yard and southeast Pennsylvania. But there are chickadees all over the country. You've got 3 species of chickadees here in California, all pretty much the same bird doing the same thing. And one of the things they're doing is eating seeds at our feeders. And we tend to think that's all chickadees need is seeds. Well, even in the wintertime, only 50% of their diet is seeds. The other 50% is insects and spiders, even in the wintertime. And so when it comes time to reproduce, the interesting thing is their babies can't eat seeds at all. So they have to give up on seeds. They have to switch to invertebrates. And if they're in a healthy environment, they will rear their young exclusively on caterpillars. And they are not alone. 96% of our terrestrial birds rear their young on insects, and most of those insects are caterpillars. So there's something special about caterpillars. What is it? There's actually several things special about caterpillars, and one of them is that they are soft. So think of this guy as if he's a little sausage with a very thin wrapper. The thin wrapper is exoskeleton. It's made of chitin. It's undigestible. And because they're soft, you can stuff them down the throat of your offspring without fear of injuring them. And if you've ever watched a parent bird rear their young, they're pretty rough. It's like a plunger. Caterpillars are also relatively large prey items. One medium-sized caterpillar is equal to the biomass of 200 aphids. Now, some of our smaller birds do chase aphids around, but do you want to chase 200 aphids or get one caterpillar? They're also nutritious. They're very high in fat, very high in protein, low percentage of chitin compared to many other insects, particularly beetles. Beetles are not like little sausages. They're like little tanks. So much of a beetle is undigestible, and many beetles have really sharp edges, too. And then finally, it turns out that caterpillars are the best source of carotenoids for birds during the breeding season. And I mention carotenoids not because I love organic chemistry, but because I'm a vertebrate. And you're a vertebrate, and birds are vertebrates. And we vertebrates cannot make our own carotenoids. Only plants make carotenoids. So we have to get our carotenoids from plants. And we have to get them from plants because carotenoids are essential components of vertebrate diets. Where are the birds getting their carotenoids from during the breeding season? From those things they bring back to the nest. But look, carotenoid content is not equally distributed among bird prey items. These first 2 bars here are types of caterpillars. They have far more carotenoids than other types of bird prey. Here are the adult caterpillars. Here, the moths and butterflies themselves, they have far fewer carotenoids because they're not eating the green leaves. That's where the carotenoids are. And there's the earthworm way over there. So the early bird gets the worm, but he doesn't get any carotenoids when he gets the worm. So there's other studies that suggest for most birds, caterpillars are not optional parts of their diets. They are essential parts of their diets. So let's just say most birds need caterpillars. The next question is, how many caterpillars do they need? Is 1 or 2 enough? Or 1 or 2 a day enough? It's a good question. So let's go back to Carolina chickadees. How many caterpillars does it take to make a nest of Carolina chickadees? The reason you're using Carolina chickadees is there's a lot of data on Carolina chickadees. Well, 1 or 2 is not enough. 1 or 2 a day is not enough. It takes thousands, 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to get one clutch of chickadees to the point where they leave the nest. And after they leave the nest, they continue to feed their babies, caterpillars, another 21 days, but they're flying all around, so nobody's been able to count that. So you're really talking about tens of thousands of caterpillars required to get one clutch of a bird that's 1/3 of an ounce through to maturity. That's 4 pennies worth of bird. And if you want chickadees to breed in your yard, and I would think you do, you need all those caterpillars in your yard because they only forage about 50 meters from the nest. And that's true for the most of the birds that are out there. They're foraging very close to the nest. They are not flying 5 miles down the road to the nearest woodlot. And if we landscape in a way that does not include all those caterpillars, that's called insect decline. And it's really looking like insect decline is one of the major causes of the bird declines that people are measuring. We went to the original data set of Rosenberg et al. That's the group, the Smithsonian group, who said that we've lost 3 billion breeding birds in the last 50 years. And we divided terrestrial bird species in North America into 2 groups. The species that require insects, particularly when they're breeding, and the species that do not require insects when they're breeding. So things like doves and finches and crossbills can actually make a little milk out of the seeds that they eat, and they can rear their young on that little milk. And look, that group didn't decline at all in the last 50 years. But the birds that require insects decline on average 10 million individuals per species. That does not prove cause and effect, but it does suggest that as you take bird food away, you lose the birds. So I think we need to raise the bar about what we're asking our landscapes to do. In the past, we've asked them to do one thing, be pretty. Now we're going to ask them to do 2 things, be pretty and ecologically functional at the same time. And that's not going to happen unless we put those all-important caterpillars back. So how do you do that? How do you add caterpillars to a landscape? You do that by adding the plants that support those caterpillars. Seems pretty straightforward. But there is a catch, and that is that most plants do not support a lot of caterpillars. So we have to be fussy about which ones we're choosing for our landscapes. And we have to be fussy about it because the caterpillars themselves are fussy about it. And the monarch butterfly illustrates that perfectly. You can have all the eucalyptus and all of the hostas and all the things we landscape with from Asia in our yards, and you won't make a single monarch butterfly. The only thing that's going to make a monarch butterfly is one of the milkweeds. That is called host plant specialization. And it turns out that most of the insects that eat plants are host plant specialists. They can only eat particular plants. Why is that? Well, plants don't want to be eaten. They want to capture the energy from the sun and use it for their own growth and reproduction. So they've loaded their tissues with nasty tasting chemicals, secondary metabolic compounds that make those tissues either bitter or downright toxic. And it's a really effective defense. It keeps most of the insects of the world from eating most of the plants of the world, which is why it's green out there in the summertime. I guess down here it's always green. It's not because there's no insects out there that want to eat those plants. It's because most of the insects that are out there cannot eat most of the plants. They are too well protected. There's a reason it's hard to get our kids to eat their vegetables. They are inherently, they know that they're toxic. But insects do eat plants. So how do they do that? How do they get around those nasty chemicals? This is where the specialization comes in. Insects can only eat the plants for which they have the adaptations necessary to circumvent those chemical defenses. They need specialized enzymes that store and excrete and detoxify those compounds, behavioral adaptations and life history adaptations that minimize their exposure to those compounds. But it takes a long period of interacting over evolutionary time for the insects to develop all those adaptations. And once they do, they become locked into eating the particular plant lineage that they just specialized on. So if you take the milkweeds out of your yard, the monarch's not going to be able to start eating your eucalyptus. Can't do it. Has 2 choices then. Fly away and find milkweed someplace else, or starve to death. Turns out there's 3 kinds of plants out there. We want to make this as simple as possible because it is simple. There are plants that contribute energy to local food webs. There are plants that do not contribute energy to local food webs. And there are plants that remove energy from local food webs. The very best contributor in 84% of the counties in which they occur is one of our oaks. The genus Quercus is contributing more energy to local food webs than any other plant genus by far. Good example of a non-contributor would be a ginkgo biloba from Asia. Nice ornamental plant, has good fall color, but nothing eats a ginkgo. So it's not adding any of the energy it captured from the sun to local food webs. And a good example of a detractor would be any of the non-native plants we brought over that have escaped cultivation and become invasive species in our natural areas. Not only are they not supporting local food webs, but they're pushing out the native plants that do. So they're removing, the net effect is removing energy from those food webs. Now you got everybody has a lot of invasive plants, but California is no exception. We've measured what happens in an invasion like this to caterpillar biomass. And every time we've measured, it's a reduction of about 96%. If you think of those caterpillars as bird food, you've just reduced bird food by 96%. Now, there are a lot of reasons our birds is declining, but starving them is certainly one of them. So all I'm trying to say here is that plant choice matters. We are not going to rebuild functional ecosystems if we don't have functional food webs in those ecosystems. And we're not going to have functional food webs unless we put the plants in that support those food webs. And I'm going to give you 3 examples of how well this works, starting with my house, our house. My wife wants me to call it our house, just because she paid for it. This is what it looked like this is Oxford, Pennsylvania. In the year 2000, we got a 10-acre lot of a farm that was broken up into 10-acre lots. It was a very old farm, been farmed almost 300 years. And the last thing they did before we bought it was mow it for hay. So there were very few plants there, and our job was to restore the eastern deciduous ecosystem that was once there, which we had never done before and didn't know how to do. But one of the things I wanted to try was to plant the host plant of a particular moth species and see whether that species came and found that host plant and colonized it. Again, which I had never done. The first thing I tried was the Canadian owlet. People say, why'd you choose the Canadian owlet? I was looking through Dave Wagner's caterpillars of eastern North America, and I said, that's a pretty one. So that's what the adult looks like, just like leaves. I'd never seen a Canadian owlet before, but you're not going to have Canadian owlet unless you have their host plant, which is meadow rue. And we didn't have any host plant. We didn't have any meadow rue. I am sure that was there 300 years ago before the area was farmed to death, but long gone. So I got some meadow rue seeds from someplace and I planted it, and they grew very nicely. But this was early on. I actually had very little faith that Canadian owlets would appear out of nowhere and colonize my little patch of meadow rue, so I didn't even go out and check it. It was at least 2 months after I planted it. And then I was walking by for another reason, and I glanced over. It was covered with Canadian owlets. They had found it right away. I'm still impressed with that. So now we have a good population of Canadian owlets and meadow rue. We've added 2 species to the property. The restoration has begun. Same story with the goldenrod stowaway. That's actually a misnomer of that beautiful moth. It has nothing to do with goldenrod. It's a specialist on that plant. Biden's aristosa, ditch daisy. And we didn't have any Biden's aristosa, but there was a patch of Biden's in a power line cut about 14 miles away. So I got some seeds, planted them at home. They did very nicely. As a matter of fact, last year they took over my front yard. That's okay. I had to wait a year for a goldenrod stowaway to find my patch of Biden's, but they did, and now they're there. So we've added another 2 species. That's a total of 4 species to the property. Want to see if I can get the hackberry emperor to make a living at our house. Not because it's the most beautiful butterfly in the world, but because it belongs there. It's one of the species that ought to be there. And as its name suggests, it's a specialist on hackberry, on Celtis. We didn't have any hackberry. So I got some hackberry trees, planted them. I had to wait 4 years for the hackberry emperor to find my hackberry, but they did. Now we have a good population of them. We've added 6 species, and that is how the restoration proceeded. I did not plant goldenrod, came in on its own. Along with it came many of the things that specialize on goldenrod, like the beautiful brown-hooded owlet, the Arcidra flower moth, the goldenrod leaf miner, the distinct Sparaginothus, the goldenrod gall moth. There are 110 species of moths that use goldenrod in the mid-Atlantic states. Very important plant. I planted Virginia creeper. Now, back east, a lot of people don't like Virginia creeper, but I don't know why. It is a wonderful native plant. It has good fall color. It can climb our trees without girdling them, without pulling them down. It's a good ground cover. It makes valuable berries for the birds in the fall. There they are. Valuable because they are high in fat. Our migrating birds need sources of fat, and our overwintering birds need sources of fat, and those berries help provide it. And those berries came from tiny little inconspicuous flowers. You don't even know when Virginia creeper is in bloom until you see a big cloud of native bees around it. It turns out it's a really important pollinator plant. So remember, when you're making a pollinator garden, you're making it for the pollinators. If it's not big and showy for you, that's okay. I planted Virginia creeper because it's the best host plant for the large sphinx moths that are a primary component of cardinal diets. Things like the Pandora sphinx and its beautiful adult, the lettered sphinx, the hog sphinx, the abbot sphinx, all on Virginia creeper. Want to see if I get the evening primrose moth to make a living at our house because it's beautiful. I like beauty like anybody else. And as its name suggests, it's a specialist on evening primrose, and we didn't have any evening primrose, so I planted it specifically to attract that moth, and it worked. The moth came, it spends the day with its head stuffed in the flowers. Sometimes it's crowded in there, but it's always very cute. And I planted lots of oaks. Now, these are just examples of the plant lineages we have put on our property. But I want to focus on oaks for a while because they are such important plants. That's the Bedford oak in Bedford, New York, Martha Stewart land. People argue about whether it's 400 years old or 500 years old. It's enormous. And I hear people say, I'm not going to plant an oak because I won't live long enough to enjoy it. And if you can only enjoy your oak when it's 400 years old, you're right. You will not. But if you can enjoy what your oak is contributing to your local food web, you can enjoy it right away. And I can say that with confidence because I planted most of my oaks as acorns, free, or 2-foot bare root whips, which cost $1.50 each. And immediately they started to call in the moths that make the caterpillars that run the food web at our house. Things like the solitary oak leaf miner, Juvenil's dusky wing, the yellow-shouldered moth, Suzuki's promolactus, the red wash caterpillar, the yellow-vested moth. There's the orange-tufted oneida. A spiny oak caterpillar, 2-spotted oak punky, the variable oak leaf caterpillar, the red-humped oakworm, the pink-striped oakworm, the hesitant dagger moth, the lesser oak dagger moth, the medium dagger moth, the greater oak dagger moth, the streaked dagger moth, the afflicted dagger moth, the crowned bucolatrix, the orange-patch smoky wing, the white-blotched heterocampa, the oblique heterocampa, the red-line panapoda, the laugher, and literally hundreds more species of moths have come to the oaks on our property. I love it when people clap for the oaks. It's great. And look, they come right away. This is a pin oak that just popped its head above the leaves. There's a caterpillar standing on the ground eating the leaves of that tree. And people say, oh, no, it's going to kill the tree. No, an oven bird's going to come eat that in the next 20 minutes, and that'll be that. So it's the very first year your oaks will start to contribute to your local food web. You don't have to wait decades or hundreds of years. So the question is, now we put a lot of plants back in our yard. Not all of them by any stretch. I took this picture pretty much from the same place I took that first picture. And the question is, has life returned? Does this work, in other words? Very important question. Now, you can measure life any way you want. I'm measuring it in terms of the number of bird species that are breeding, have nested on our property, and the number of moth species that are now calling our property home. Moths, not butterflies. Butterflies are actually bad-tasting, day-flying moths. They really are. They come right out in the middle of the moth lineage. And because they don't taste very good, that's why they fly during the day, they're not adding a lot of food to the local food web. They're beautiful, we love them, but I'm just counting the moths. And I'm still doing it. I've been doing it for I don't know, 10 years now, I think. And I am up to 1,366 species of moths that I have pictures of that I've taken on our property because we put the plants back. And if we have time afterwards, I can show you that PowerPoint. We've got 10 acres. Pennsylvania is something like 23.9 million acres. So in one tiny, tiny, tiny slice of Pennsylvania, we've got 44% of all the moth species that occur in the entire state because we put the plants back. And because so many of those are types of bird food, we have recorded 62 species of birds that have bred on our 10 acres. Not flew by, but bred. Why am I telling you that? Well, this is another headline we see all the time. The World Wildlife Fund says that Earth has lost 2/3 of its wildlife since 1970. It's a terrible statistic. But I'm thinking, gee, not at our house. I am convinced we have increased biodiversity by more than 2/3. It didn't take that long, and it wasn't that hard. We just put the plants back. What would happen if everybody put the plants back? we really could turn a lot of these terrible statistics around. But will it work on smaller properties? Let's say in suburbia. Not everybody has 10 acres. That's a great question. So let's go to Margie and Dan Terpstra's house in Kirkwood, Missouri. They have 0.6 acres, 18 times less land than Cindy and I have. They're in the middle of a development. Everybody around them has the big lawns. When they moved into their yard, it was choked with Amur honeysuckle, bush honeysuckle, another big invasive in the Midwest. So the first thing they did was remove that. Then they planted 70 species of native plants. They put in a water feature that they call a bubbler, and then they started to count the birds that are using their yard. And they're still at it, but they're up to 154 bird species that have stopped in their 0.6 acres, including an amazing 35 warbler species. We've only recorded 18 warbler species at our house. So does it work on smaller properties? Absolutely. What about urban yards? Let's go to Pam Carlson's house in Chicago. And I mean in Chicago because her property abuts O'Hare Airport. She has 1/10 of an acre, 3 times smaller than the average lot size. She's not connected to any natural area at all. She's a tiny little island in the middle of Chicago. It is a pretty island because Pam is a native plant landscaper and she knows what she's doing. She did the same thing. She removed the non-native plants on her property, put in 60 species of native plants, including a water feature, and then she sat back, she always says, with a glass of wine, and started counting the birds that are using her yard. And she's also still at it, but she's up to 127 species of birds that have used her yard, her little 1/10 of an acre, including a woodcock. There's Pam's woodcock. So if you haven't seen a woodcock lately, go to Pam's house in Chicago. All right, there's 4 things we need to think about if we're going to succeed in a big way, and we want to succeed in a big way. And one of those things is we've got to talk about all the lawn that's out there. Now, I know you guys in Southern California are not big offenders, but the rest of the nation is. We've got 44 million acres of lawn nationwide. That's an area bigger than all of New England combined, dedicated to an ecological deadscape. Why do we do that? Well, it's a status symbol. It's a very important status symbol, and we love our status symbols. We also love neat, and it's easy to keep lawn neat, and we have to display our Halloween decorations. So. Remember, there's 4 ecological responsibilities that every bit of private property has out there. Every landscape has to support a viable food web. Every landscape, if you don't have a viable food web, you don't have any animals. If you don't have any animals, you don't have a functional ecosystem. Every landscape has to sequester carbon to help climate change. Every landscape has to manage the watershed in which it lies. And every landscape has to support pollinators. Lawn does none of those things, which is why I pick on it. So let's reduce the area of lawn. Let's cut it in half. Now notice I'm not saying let's get rid of it. It's the perfect plant to walk on. But let's start by reducing it by half. Let's make the math simple. Well, let's take areas that look like this and turn them into this. This is a picture I got from Dan Getman, again, in Missouri. He had that big lawn there, and he said, look, I'm planting native plants, and he sent me that picture. So let's make the math simple, say that we've got 40 million acres of lawn. We're going to cut that in half. That'll give us 20 million acres that we can restore right at home, and that's what we're going to create Homegrown National Park out of. And it'll be big. It'll be bigger than the Adirondacks, plus Yellowstone, plus Yosemite, plus Grand Tetons, Canyonlands, Mount Rainier, North Cascades, Badlands National Park, Olympic National Park, Sequoia National Park, the Grand Canyon, plus Denali, which is huge, plus the Great Smoky Mountains. Add up all those parks, still less than 20 million acres. So Homegrown National Park will be the biggest park in the country. You can join it, small nonprofit at this point, but you go to our website, homegrownnationalpark.org, and register your property on the biodiversity map. So just your location and the amount of your property you're pledging to be a good steward of. Or maybe you already are, but even if you're not, you're going to pledge. Maybe you really are going to reduce the area of lawn. Maybe you're going to plant an oak. Maybe you're going to put an aster in a flower pot. It doesn't matter how modest it is. Then your little piece of your county is going to light up with a firefly. And you can see how many other people in your county have joined Homegrown National Park by how many fireflies there are. And of course, the object is to get the entire country, the entire world, to light up with fireflies. Canada's playing this game now, too. So our mission is very simple. We want to catalyze people to plant native and remove natives. We want to increase biodiversity in the way that you increase biodiversity, by putting the native plants that support it in your yard, removing the non-natives that don't, and in so doing, creating a culture that's sympathetic to the needs of conservation. There are real ecological products associated with Homegrown National Park. One is a significant increase in biodiversity. And when I look at what's happened at our house, it works. It really does work. I've been amazed at how fast nature has repaired herself if you give her half a chance. Measurable reduction in invasive species. If everybody removed the invasive plants just from their property, something very doable, we'd be almost 80% done in the country, 85% done in the East. Not totally done, but a very good first step. Significant drawdown of atmospheric CO2. Lawn is the worst plant for sequestering carbon. So if you replace it with any other kind of planting, you're going to sequester more carbon and help climate change. You're also going to create habitat outside of parks and preserves. Any bit of conservation we do outside of a park helps conservation inside of the park. But there are equally important sociological benefits of Homegrown National Park, and one is national awareness. Not just of what the problems are, but what the solutions are and what our roles in those solutions are. We are trying to change the culture. We want people to recognize that nature's not optional. It's not just there for our entertainment. It's essential for everybody, which means everybody owns responsibility to sustaining it. We want to convert hope into action. Hope is good, but action's even better. And we want to merge all the existing conservation organizations that are doing great conservation on private property onto one visual, the biodiversity map. So things like Audubon, National Wildlife Federation, Sierra Club. We've got this 30 by 30 initiative. We're going to save 30% of the planet by 2030, or 30% of the US by 2030. Not if we don't count conservation that's happening on private property. So that's what that biodiversity map is all about. Did I mention Homegrown National Park is free? We're not trying to pull people away from other conservation organizations. We just want to record the good conservation that's happening on private property. So we're going to shrink the lawn. What plants should we put in the area that was once lawn? Well, I'm going to say that some of those plants need to be what I call keystone plants. Remember what a keystone is. It's the stone in the middle of the Roman arch, and if you take the stone out of the arch collapses. Well, if you take keystone plants out of your local food web, the food web collapses because those are the plants making most of the food. Those are the plants supporting most of the caterpillars. Just 14% of our native plants are supporting 90% of the caterpillar biomass that's driving those food webs. So think of the keystone plants in the ecological house that you're building as the 2x4s that hold that house up. They are the support system. You can't build a house without support. We cannot build a house out of wallpaper, and that's what we've been trying to do for the last 100 years. Again, oak's number one keystone plant throughout the country in the areas that it occurs. 270 species of caterpillars supported by oaks in California. Over 1,000 species nationwide. No other plant genus comes close to that. So how do you know what the best plants are where you live? You go to CalScape. You folks in California have the best tool for finding this information in the entire country. It is called CalScape, created by the California Native Plant Society. And you look up where you are. Every single native plant population is georeferenced in the state. So you can see, here's where I live. Here are the plants that belong there. And you can also see how many caterpillars those plants are supporting. Very valuable tool. So we're going to shrink the lawn, we're going to use keystone plants, we're going to invite a lot of insects into our yard, and then we're going to kill them with our security light, which is not the goal. It turns out that light pollution is one of the major causes of insect declines around the country, and those are all the ways that lights are killing our insects, particularly the moths that make the caterpillars that run our food webs. So it's a really serious environmental problem, particularly given the number of lights that we have on all the time. So it's a really serious environmental problem, but it has a really simple solution. First of all, you are allowed to turn out your light. There's no rule against that. If you're worried about security, and everybody is, put a motion sensor on your light so that it only turns on when the bad man comes, and you will find he doesn't come that often. Even easier is to take the white bulb out of your security light and put in a yellow light, an amber light. You can buy them at the hardware store. They're called bug lights. Sounds like they're going to kill your insects, but they're actually going to protect them because nocturnal insects are not attracted to yellow wavelengths. So if we were to switch out our white bulbs for yellow lights overnight, we'd save millions of insects, and if we use yellow LEDs, we'd save millions of dollars too. So the fourth thing we need to do is to landscape in a way that allows those all-important caterpillars to complete their development. Now, I live in Chester County, Pennsylvania, where oaks support 511 species of caterpillars. A few of them, like the polyphemus moth, complete their development on the tree. The caterpillar eats the leaves, then they spin a cocoon and hang from one of the branches, then they emerge as an adult, then they do it all over again. Everything happens on the tree. But that is an exception. Most of the species, and this is not just oaks, they'll complete the development as a caterpillar and then drop from the tree and wiggle their way underneath the soil and pupate underground, or they spin a cocoon in the leaf litter that's under the tree, and that's the problem. There is no leaf litter under the tree. We don't tolerate it. It's messy, and we mow and compact the area under our trees so that the area is rock hard, very difficult for those caterpillars to get underground to safety. Which takes, that's an oak right there, that takes that plant and makes it an ecological trap. It calls in the moths, they lay their eggs, caterpillars develop, drop down, and die. And of course, the cement landscape is not the answer either. Now, this is what most people do. They have a tree in a yard, and most of the time, the lawn is going right up to the tree. Recent grad student Emma Jonas measured how well caterpillars do in a situation like that compared to a layered landscape like this. And of course, they do much better in a layered landscape like that. Heather Holm and Rebecca McCracken call this soft landing. Actually, it has nothing to do with buffering their fall when they drop. What it does do, though, is it keeps us out. It creates a no-go zone where we're not mowing and we're not walking, which means the soil is not compacted. And there's also leaf litter down there. It's exactly what those caterpillars need to complete their development. And you can do that in the West here as well. Just make areas where you're not going to be tramping or mowing all the time, and the caterpillars will love it. And so will the trees. One of the people interviewed on the little video, the Desiree Narango, she was my former student. And she did a great study in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. that told us lots of things, but one of the important messages was there is room for compromise in our choice of plants. And it turns out that what she was doing was seeing what types of landscapes are capable of supporting chickadee populations sustainably. And she found that it needed at least 70% native plant biomass to support a chickadee population. But that leaves 30% that you can fool around with. Now, we can't tolerate any invasive plants. They are ecological tumors that don't stay where we plant them, and they just keep growing and growing and growing. I did get an email from somebody saying, can't we have just a few? I said, well, how many tumors do you want in your body? Just a few, you know? They don't stay just a few, that's the problem. But, you know, in the East, crepe myrtle is a big one. So crepe myrtle, okay. Ginkgo, okay. Calorie pear, not okay. Doesn't stay where you plant it. But it allows you can, you know, gardeners love beauty, and you can enhance your landscape with very attractive plants as long as they are not invasive and as long as it doesn't exceed 70% native plants. Remember Dan Getman? That's a ginkgo tree in the middle of Dan's native plant garden. Why does Dan have a ginkgo tree in his native plant garden? Well, it turns out Dan's wife likes ginkgo trees, and Dan likes his wife, so he planted a ginkgo tree. The question is that tree going to destroy the ecological integrity of that landscape? No, it's not. It's just there. Is it going to escape and wreck the woodlot? No. It's not invasive. It's just there. So I like to think of plants that are, you know, they're just ornamental, staying there, not doing much, but being pretty as their statue. So there you go. There's Dan's statue. If all of Dan's plants were statues, he would not have a functional landscape. The point is, it's not the presence of these non-native plants that destroys food webs. It's the absence of the productive native plants that is destroying them. So if we get more of the native plants in there, we can tolerate non-natives without ruining anything. Can we use natives in formal designs? Of course we can. This is a Lynn O'Shaughnessy design, taken by a drone 400 feet up. You don't get more formal than that, and every plant in that landscape is a native plant. Formality is a function of the design. It's not a function of the plants in the design. Our native plants are used in formal designs in Europe. Every day they love them over there. If the Europeans can love our native plants, maybe we can too. Can we get a pollinator garden into a small yard like this without offending anybody? Of course we can. Put a little fence around it. It formalizes it. It tells your neighbors that this is intentional. It's not just a few weeds you forgot to mow. It's pretty when it's in bloom. It's meeting the needs of several species of bees. It's not very big. It could be bigger. But if everybody did it, it would help a lot. Help what? Help make pollinators. Why do we need pollinators? Well, the media will tell you we need pollinators because they're pollinating a third of our plants, our ag plants. But I've heard people say, I don't live next to a farm, so I don't need any pollinators. Forget the ag argument. They're pollinating 80% of all plants and 90% of all flowering plants, including a few ag plants. But we need pollinators everywhere we need plants, which is everywhere. And you've got some wonderful pollinator plants here that not only, this is Ceanothus, this is California lilac. It's a very powerful caterpillar plant as well as a pollinator plant. Your asters do both as well. Can municipalities help us live with nature? Can they incentivize it? Of course they can. And Minnesota's been doing it for a number of years now. They have a cost-sharing program where they're paying homeowners to reduce or replace their lawns with appropriate Minnesota prairie plants. It's very popular, and so popular that Pennsylvania started a similar program. Virginia's thinking about it. I wish it would spread all over the country. There's an island off of Florida, Marco Island, that is paying homeowners to allow burrowing owls, listed species, to burrow in the front yard. Endangered species. This is how the Endangered Species Act should have been written, with carrots rather than sticks. If you have an endangered species on your property, we're going to pay you to take care of it, rather than fine you if you use your property. Everybody would want an endangered species. Put a bounty on invasive ornamentals like Callery pear. That's what St. Louis, Missouri did. Fayetteville, Arkansas, North Carolina. If you take out a Callery pear, you get a free tree replacement. San Antonio and other public utilities are giving people $100 coupons to plant water-efficient native plants. And of course, the lawn reduction programs you have down here, Los Angeles County and other places. That's going up $3 per rebate per square foot of lawn you remove because, you know, California does not have enough water for lawns. So I think we've made 3 missteps in the early years of conservation. And the first one's important. We're starting to think of nature as if it's optional. We like nature. We like to go bird watching or just sit and commune with it. But it's not essential, we think. And if it's not essential, when push comes to shove, when resources are in short supply, nature takes a back seat. And of course, resources are always in short supply. I went to the Cincinnati Zoo. And there's this wall-sized poster there, which to me epitomizes our society's view of conservation. We want to save wildlife. We want to save nature so that future generations can enjoy it. That was Teddy Roosevelt's argument for expanding the national park system. Beautiful places, we want to save them so that future generations can enjoy it. And I get that because nature is enormously entertaining, but it is much more than that. We need to save nature so that we have future generations. It's a little bit more urgent. We've also assumed that humans and nature cannot coexist. We talked about this, but if we confine conservation just to the places where there's very few humans, we're going to fail because those places are too small, there's too few of them, and they're too isolated. David Qualman has a wonderful analogy between a Persian rug and an ecosystem. That is a functional Persian rug. That's not 71 Persian rugs. That's 71 rug fragments, none of which are acting like a Persian rug, and that's what we've done to our ecosystems. The UN designates biosphere reserves as places of ecological significance, and I don't like that language because it suggests there are places on planet Earth with no ecological significance. Not so. Every square inch of the planet has ecological significance, including our yards, including our corporate landscapes, including our roadsides, even including much of our agriculture. So we need to glue our rug back together again, folks. We've got to put the plants back. Not just to make biological corridors that connect isolated habitat fragments with each other, but to repopulate, restore places where we remove nature altogether. And the good news is it's starting to happen. It is starting to happen all over the country. And when it does, it'll be the first time in modern history that we humans have coexisted with the natural world. Our third misstep was to leave Earth stewardship to just a few specialists. A few conservation biologists, a few ecologists. For some reason, we didn't see it as an inherent responsibility of every human being on the planet. But I don't know why, since every single human being on the planet depends entirely on the quality of local ecosystems. So why wouldn't everybody bear the responsibility of taking care of those ecosystems? It does not mean you have to save biodiversity for a living, but you can save it where you live. And if you do, it empowers you. More and more people are upset about the state of the planet, but they feel powerless. What can one person do? Well, one person can shrink the lawn, one person can change their light bulb, one person can remove the invasive plants from their property, one person can put in a pollinator garden, one person can, I don't know if you hire mosquito foggers, you can fire them because they kill all the insects. There's a whole bunch of things that one person can do to revitalize the little ecosystem on their property and then enhance their greater local ecosystem. And it also shrinks the problem down to something that's manageable for each one of us. Don't think about the entire planet's problem. Just worry about the piece of the earth that you can influence. If you own property, it's obvious. That's where you start. If you don't own property, help somebody who does. Help a land conservancy, help a park or preserve. They are all underfunded, they're all understaffed. They will love you as a volunteer. Aldo Leopold once said, one of the penalties of an ecological education is that one lives alone in a world of wounds. He said that in the 40s, and he was alone in a world of wounds, but you are no longer alone. Everywhere, people are starting to heal their wounds on their little piece of the earth, and you can as well. Robert Swan recently said the greatest threat to our planet is believing that someone else will save it. Not going to be someone else, folks. It's going to be you, because you are nature's best hope. Thanks very much. Thank you. Any questions? Thank you. I guess we have a little time for some questions. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Use a camera. Yeah, they don't want you to see them. They're hiding, and they're very good at it. So one of the things you can do is go out at night. A lot of them are much more apparent at night when the birds are not hunting them. Use a flashlight. During the day, they're hiding underneath the leaves so the birds can't see them, or they go off the plant altogether. They're on the sticks or the bark. You have to form what we call a search image. I did not take all those pictures in one day. So, yes. Go ahead. That's a common name of the family Noctuidae. So if they're in that family, and it's a very large family, they're called owlet moths. Why? I do not know. Yes. Yeah, the hell strip. It's a good question. We've got about 4 million miles of paved roads in the country, and each one of those roads has two sides. And if there's a verge, a habitat on both sides, it could be a lot of potential habitat. And in some areas, the verge is like down south, Alabama, Mississippi, the verge is like 100 yards wide, and it's mowed. So it could be a lot of really good habitat. And if you're in a busy street and you plant habitat right next to the street, you're increasing the chances that those insects are going to be hit by cars. But if it's fairly slow traffic, that could be all right. So you have to use judgment. We did do a study. I did a study with some undergrads a few years ago, and we found that insects are hit by cars, but the real problem is when we landscape the median of a high-speed highway, because there's no way they can get there without crossing traffic. The edges of the roads seem to be okay, so. Right. The object is to make more insects than you're killing. And that's difficult to measure, so we don't know. Anything else? Yes? That's what Native Plant Finder. Native Plant Finder is the National Wildlife Federation database, but your Cowscape is better. So yes, Cowscape. Yeah. A caterpillar? Oh, no, yes. No, yes. There are species that are active all year. Yeah, even where I live, there are a whole bunch of moths called winter moths. They don't even come out to early November. But for the most part, it's seasonal. But there's this horticultural myth going around that if you wait to a certain number of degree days in the spring, then you can clean up and destroy everything because everything will have emerged. That's not true. They emerge sequentially throughout the entire summer and into the fall. So you want to landscape in a way where you're always preserving something that has been overwintering. Yes.
So here in California, we have the California Environmental Quality Act, but it's really being degraded because everybody wants to come in. You know, we're in this vicious cycle of too many homes, Airbnbs. But what happens is they want low maintenance, and one of the things is they're putting in this artificial turf. Is there any kind of it's another microplastic. Is there any kind of a national effort to curb, to look at the environmental hazards of this plastic grass that people are putting in?
Well, if you paved over the entire planet, that would be low maintenance too. Right. But sure, you're removing any form of habitat. You're even removing water absorption. You're wrecking the watershed. Nothing.
It seems to be nothing is stopped trying to.
Yeah. There should be infiltration rules in your township about what infiltration can be blocked, and I bet you've already exceeded what should be blocked. So adding to that ought to be against the law. You're right. National effort? No, they'd say it's up to the states. But you're right. There's nothing positive about that. Low maintenance.
Anyway, it's awful.
It's one of the benefits.
Looking at the microplastic problems also that will create.
Sure.
Or the toxicity of
Yep.
plastic that's being used as the turf.
Yep. Nothing good about it. I don't know of any national effort to control it, though. Yes. See, who else? Who was first? Go ahead.
So I've been planning with native plants and rentals that I've lived in for almost 15 years now, and that has kept me really hopeful. But I'm wondering how you, in the face of so much continued degradation, I go from where I live in Ojai into Ventura or Oxnard or Camarillo, and I see so many non-native plants. It's overwhelming to me. How do you, in particular, maintain your hope, maintain your motivation in the face of all of that?
Because I hear people like you tell me you've been doing it for 15 years. And 10 years ago, you wouldn't have told me that. I can see the long-term trend. The demand for native plants nationwide is exceeding the supply. That's a business opportunity that'll start to feed on itself. There's just a lot of interest around the country. So that's what keeps me going. It seems to be working. We're changing a 100-year-old culture here, and that's not going to happen overnight, but it is happening a lot faster than I thought it would. So, yes.
I'm from Altadena, and I lost my house in the Eaton fire. And I'm sure you know the whole of Altadena burned down. And I am wondering if there are any model communities that have worked with a large number of Boston homeowners, not just recovering from something like a fire, but just that have a sense of urgency around planning. So if there are any successful models, because right now there are a lot of people who are interested in informing residents, but it's kind of a patchwork.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. We don't have that issue in the East, so I'm not an expert on that at all. But I would talk to the folks at the California Native Plant Society for examples like that. They have designs that you can use. I guess the whole state is talking about this 5-foot space between the house and we're going to have no plants at all, gravel. But there are other plants that are very good at intercepting flying embers, like live oaks. They put them out. So rather than saying my oak tree is going to burn me down, it's probably going to save you. The biggest problem is what we build our houses out of. If you look at pictures of the Paradise Fire, all the houses are nothing, and the trees are standing right there. It's because we build out a highly flammable material, so we've got to correct that too. But yeah, I'm not the guy who can point you to a good example. It's fairly recent, you know. So if they're good examples, they will be really recent ones. So.
The garden is working on building that database and trying to provide examples of how you can use appropriate native plants in a fire-safe way.
Good, great. Yes.
Following up on the fire, so do you have any guidance in balancing the need for trying to contribute to the ecosystem with the very real requirements often imposed by fire departments on clearing brush, mowing weeds, that sort of thing? We have a 6 to 9 month period of fire.
Yeah. It's really the same question. How we landscape in a fire-wise way. And I'm going to turn it over to the garden to provide all that information. You want to remove fuel, but zero plants is, I think we can do better than that. I really do. Yes. Dangerous insects? Endangered insects. I don't know if that's part of CalScape or not. Does anybody? Right. Yeah. 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 A little bit more work on your end, but you can probably track it down. Yes. You're probably talking about you. Well, there's Asclepias corypsavica, which is the tropical milkweed that is very popular in the east. I know. Is that what we're talking about here? It's the milkweed that grows right where the monarchs overwinter. And there's a concern that if you plant a lot of that, the monarchs won't migrate the way they should. They pretty much, there's not a lot of evidence supporting that in the east. A bigger problem is when you plant milkweeds that do not die back in the wintertime, because then the disease, we'll just call it OE, it's a protozoan, builds up, the spores build up on the plant tissue. There are places in Louisiana and Mississippi where monarchs that visit old Asclepias corypsavica, 90% of them get infected. So that's a reason to not plant a plant a milkweed that doesn't belong where you are. And that's all I know about it. You want to add to that? Both and the migratory problem too, yeah. Right. I think that's it, folks.
Thanks so much, Doug. That was awesome. I really liked your quote of "hope is good, action's better." I might steal that. So I'm Heather Schneider. I'm the Director of Conservation and Research at Santa Barbara Botanic Garden. And what I'm going to attempt to do with my talk is to build a bit of a bridge between Doug's work and what we're doing at the garden, and talk about the multifaceted ways that we're trying to promote native plants and landscapes, and also connections between people and native plants. And I want to start out by saying that I didn't do most of the work I'm about to talk about. This was done by a whole host of folks at the garden and our collaborators, outside organizations, volunteers, funding entities. So it's, conservation is really a people-driven endeavor, and I think this is a good example of that, so don't ask me any hard questions, okay? And the way that I'm thinking about the work that I'm talking about today is that the garden is really working to nurture nature connections. And we're doing that a few different ways and coming at it from multiple angles. So in the Department of Conservation and Research, we like to investigate and work to understand, and that's where we're studying the web of life in nature. And once we understand those connections in natural spaces, we can think about how to rebuild them in disturbed and degraded places. And once we do that, we can start to think about what do we do in landscapes where we're not going to restore a full ecosystem, but we still see some benefit to having ecosystem services and maybe some transferable benefits to humans. And then finally, but definitely not the smallest piece of what we do, is just working to connect people to nature in every way we can think of. Because I think a lot of times we forget that we're also part of the web of life. And underpinning all of the work that we do at Santa Barbara Botanic Garden is this idea that native plants are the foundation of life on Earth. Doug made a really good case for that, and it's a non-trivial thing, and this is also a powerful tool that we can use to right some of the wrongs that we've perpetrated. Now, if I was a mycologist, I might tell you that soil microbes or fungi are the foundation of all life on Earth, and I might be right, but for today, it's native plants all the way. So when we start out trying to understand the web of life, that usually looks like our group of scientists going out into nature and watching things, manipulating things, studying them. So I'm going to tell you about a plant that's near and dear to my heart. This is work I actually did participate in, studying the California jewel flower at Carrizo Plain National Monument. This is a state and federally endangered wildflower that occurs at Carrizo and a few other places in Central California. And the rare plant team and ecology team at the garden have been working together for years to understand the life cycle of this plant. When does it come up? How does it vary from year to year? What's eating it? What's pollinating it? How many seeds is it producing? What are the threats? All in the service of understanding how not just the jewel flower is doing, but how it connects to its neighbors within the community. And I started working on this plant in 2017. Which was a beautiful super bloom at Carrizo, if you were around for that. And I noticed that that year and every year since, whether the plants are 2 feet tall or 2 inches tall, something was eating them. And the plants co-occur with giant kangaroo rat mounds, and so I assumed that it was the giant kangaroo rat, which is federally endangered. But I didn't know for sure until a few years ago when we finally put out some game cameras and caught them red-handed. And people often ask me, oh my gosh, it's eating an endangered plant, is that bad? What are you gonna do about the giant kangaroo rat? I'm gonna let it eat its plants, because this is how they evolve together. They help each other. There's a little bit of loss on the jewel flower, but it's helping the kangaroo rat, and that's totally fine. This is one of those connections in nature. So we have an endangered rodent eating an endangered plant, and then adding to that is the federally threatened San Joaquin kit fox, which eats the kangaroo rat, which eats the endangered wildflower. So you start to see this rare and imperiled thread of the web of life taking shape at Carrizo Plain National Monument. But of course, these organisms don't exist in a vacuum. They're connected to a lot of other organisms at Carrizo Plain. And when we start to think about all these connections, we get the idea that while single species conservation is important and useful, it's not the whole story. And so we have to think about the whole community and how to protect that. And then we start to think about, okay, everything really is connected, just like the systems in our body. If we pull out one piece, we can tumble the pile, I don't know, what are we tumbling? Something, pile of rocks. And so once we have an idea of how these connections are interwoven in nature and who relies on who, then we can take that information and use it to start rebuilding those connections in areas that have been disturbed or degraded. So this is a picture of Elings Park, near and dear to the hearts of Santa Barbarans, where the garden has been working for 3 years on a 1-acre transformation of a site that was heavily invaded with non-native plants. And we came in, we were working to test different weed treatments to see how can we best control the weeds to make room for the native plants, and then installed a combination of native coastal sage species as well as chaparral. And then also a few plants that we're calling climate forward plantings, which are things that don't currently occur in Santa Barbara County, but maybe occur to our south, like San Diego, where it's already a little bit warmer and drier than it is here, to do a little bit of an experiment and see if over time we need to help plants move because the climate is changing. If we bring these plants north, do they start making connections with the web of life locally? Do they survive to reproduce? And that just gives us a little bit of information about how we might help nature move in the future. We also felt safe doing it at Ealing's because it's surrounded by urban area, so we're not worried about these non-local genotypes escaping into our wildlands. So it's a perfect little laboratory. And while we're doing all of this, we're collecting lots and lots of data about how are the plants doing, how are weed treatments working, and then who's using these plants once they come in. And Zach Phillips, who's speaking next, will give you a lot more details about those results. But over 3 years, we've installed more than 2,300 native plants at Ealing's Park with more than 1,000 volunteer hours. So this is what I'm saying. This is a people-driven endeavor, and we've had a lot of people helping at Ealing's. We've also offered 32 public nature walks because we want to help forge those connections for people. We not only want to show off, hey, look how good this looks, we can do this in more places, but we want people to understand why we're doing it and how it's affecting nature at Ealing's. And this year in 2026, we have a bunch of other walks lined up. So if you scan this QR code, you can go to our website and see if there's a walk that appeals to you. And in addition to trying to create large patches of functional habitat, we can also think about putting smaller patches of native plants in places where we have agriculture or other development and try to harness that power for some mutual benefit. And a good example of where we're doing that is in the Cuyama Valley. This is a fairly new project that's being undertaken by our ecology team. And they're working, for example, with 2 farms, Condor's Hope and Cuyama Homegrown, and setting up some seeded plots. They have 100 1-foot by 1-foot plots where they're seeding native annual and perennial wildflowers. They've installed 440 container plants, and then they're testing how those plants do with and without irrigation. So can we rely on natural rainfall, which is obviously a lot easier to replicate over time, the fewer inputs we put in. And then they're going to monitor those. How are the plants doing? What birds and bugs are using them? And then are we seeing any transferred benefit of pollinators and native beneficial insects that are helping with pests on the farms? So it becomes a win-win situation for nature and for the farmer. They're taking this a step further and getting that people piece as well and working with the Cuyama Unified School District to develop a community garden and also to develop native plant curricula for different ages of school kids in the area, because we really want to grow not just native plants, but native plant champions. And if we get this into the mindset of kids when they're young, then this is a conservation ethos they can carry with them through their whole lives. They're also working to develop a conservation internship program for 11th graders so that they can really get their hands dirty and get invested in this kind of work. And one other example of how we can harness the power of native plants is through the Pollinator Habitat Program, which works with 22 farms along the coastal part of the Tri-Counties and incentivizes these farmers to plant patches of native plants to create a pollinator corridor along the coast. So you can see everywhere that there's a little bee icon is a farm that has agreed to plant native plants, and we're creating this little superhighway of resources for pollinators so that as they're migrating or traveling, there's forage for them every stop along the way. And then, of course, we're also hoping that the farmers see some benefit from having this extra insect and other biodiversity coming to their property. And then, last but not least, is this idea of reconnecting people with plants. Just remembering always that we're part of the ecosystem as well, and we're not always the bad guys. We can be a force for good, and very often we are. And we're doing this every day, trying to offer as many ways as possible to connect people to native plants at the garden itself. So when people come and visit, they can see a wide swath of the botanical diversity that we have in California, much more easily than driving thousands of miles north to south. It's accessible to folks to get that understanding of the diversity, the pollinators, the birds, the mammals, everybody who is playing in the garden, not just us. We also have the backcountry section to try to have kids and those young at heart just interact with nature in a physical way and remember how fun it is to just play in nature. We offer public lectures and workshops, such as the symposium, to try to spread our message, and summer camps for kids. Let them get dirty all summer playing in native plants. We have our rotating gallery exhibits at the conservation building, and the one we have right now is related to our symposium today, and specifically the Elings Park project. If you haven't been there, you should check it out. And then we have our retail nursery, trying to connect people directly with native plants that they can take home. We're also getting out of the canyon, and recently a bunch of folks from the garden, as well as downtown Santa Barbara and Friends of State Street, and 40 volunteers installed 200 plants on the 1200 block of State Street near the Granada Theater. So this is just trying to get native plants in front of people wherever we can, however we can. We're not necessarily trying to rebuild functional habitat in the middle of the sidewalk, but we never know. Maybe some bugs will start using it, and we have some interpretive signs there just to help people connect with a sense of place. When you see something that looks a little bit different, you're like, what's this plant? Oh, it's from here, just like me. That's cool. Alejandro is going to get into this a lot more in detail, but we're also offering a native plant landscaping certification course that's really a critical link between, as Doug was mentioning, the demand and supply is a little bit of a mismatch for native plants right now, and going hand in hand with that is the expertise of landscaping professionals. Many folks need some help picking plants and installing them and maintaining them, and so Alejandro is working to help train those people up and create that body of expertise locally. And then you can look on our website and find out who has this certification. And so we're not only helping to bring a new skill set to the landscapers, but we're then connecting them with the people who need their services. We also have something called the 805 Initiative, which is focused on trying to grow more plants from locally sourced genetics from our watersheds right here, so that especially for people who live near the wildland-urban interface, you're putting the right plant in the right place, and we don't have to worry about ecological contamination of planting something from San Diego, for example, that might not be as well adapted to Santa Barbara. And this is something that we'll be scaling up in the coming years. And then we're always trying to get people to join the native plant movement, and I want to make the point that I think Doug made this point as well. The barrier to entry can be pretty low. You don't have to have 10 acres to restore. You don't have to be a conservation scientist. And the first step for the uninitiated is just to develop that personal relationship with nature. We can help you with that at the garden. You can come take a walk. You can go on a hike on one of our lovely trails. You can look out your window and write about or draw what you see. Any little way to connect with nature is the right way, as long as it resonates with you. And then if you're ready to take it a step further, we really are encouraging people, of course, to plant natives in their yard and at their apartment. If you don't have a yard, that's okay. Container plants and balcony baskets work really well also. This photo is from Matt Wang, who used to be on our rare plant team. He now works at a botanic garden in Utah. Hi, Matt. And he had an apartment in Goleta and planted a whole bunch of native wildflower seeds in his balcony baskets. And you can see he had really nice diversity just in this small strip, and saw bees and hummingbirds visiting in his balcony. So to Doug's point, if all the balconies had native plants, we could create a lot of nice strips of native habitat. So you don't have to have a lawn and a shovel to help, and just to enjoy how beautiful the plants are. And then, of course, volunteering is a great way to get involved too. We have lots of opportunities in the nursery and on the garden grounds and at Elings Park. If you want to pull weeds, we've always got some. And lastly, I want to invite all of you here and at home to join us and become a native plant steward. So as Steve mentioned at the start of this, it's our 100th anniversary at the Botanic Garden. We're immensely proud of that, and we're trying to grow this movement as big as we possibly can. And if you follow this QR code, and there are also some cards out front that have this, you can join us in what we're calling our Native Plant Steward Program. It'll enroll you in, I promise, a short but interesting suite of emails to help you figure out what kind of native plant steward you are. Are you a gardener who wants to get your hands dirty and plant and help us at places like Ealing's? Are you a community builder who wants to help spread the word and bring more people into the movement? Are you a change maker who wants to advocate for native plants, both in California and locally here in Santa Barbara? Whatever you want to contribute is great. If all you want to do is get some emails and some stickers, that's great too. We're really just trying to get people to affirm their commitment to this idea that native plants matter and they're the solution to the biodiversity crisis, and so are we. And so I'm going to leave it there and take any questions. Yes, ma'am. Right, so the question is, for people who maybe don't know about the biodiversity crisis or have the green blurs, how do we get that message across to them and help make them care? I think it's multifaceted. I think that the key is not to lead with, everything's terrible, everything's dying. At the garden, we like to say that we lead with hope and optimism because there's a lot of reason to be hopeful. I think that, man, if anybody is unaware that there's a biodiversity crisis, good on them. I don't know how they're escaping all the bad news. But you know, I think it starts with just asking folks to look around locally and to think about how they see nature in their own lives, and to really think about, you know, the difference between a lawn where you don't really see much other life other than that green lawn, and then to give them the example of what it could be. We really try to focus on empowering people rather than bogging them down. I think so many of us are feeling like the problems are so big, they're global, what can we possibly do? And there was a quote from Jane Goodall that talked about, don't try to think about the problem globally. Think about it at whatever scale you can wrap your arms around and act there. So for someone that is just a normal person trying to go about their lives, that might be as simple as putting a native plant in their backyard or becoming a member of the Botanic Garden. For someone like me who gets to do this professionally, that means trying to think about the whole state of California and what we can do at the statewide scale. But not everybody has to do that to make a difference. And so I think for me, it's all about meeting people where they're at, helping them to understand in an important but gentle way that there is a problem, but we can solve it, and then trying to give them the tools to figure out how to do that. Anybody else? Oh, yes, it's so bright up here.
Is anybody working with the big box nurseries to get them on board with this?
The question is anybody working with the big box nurseries to try to get them on board with this? I'll give a small example of what I know from my previous involvement with the California Invasive Plant Council, where we had a campaign called Plant Right, working to discourage them from selling invasive plants. But I'm going to look to our Director of Horticulture, Keith, in the front row here to help me out. Are folks working with the big box stores? Yeah. I'll repeat it too. Yeah.
Wholesale nurseries generally don't want to engage with the big box stores because the margins are so low and it's so tedious, and there's a lot of barriers to be able to operate successfully at that level.
All right. So the answer is that it's been tried. I see you. It's been tried. The margins are low, so there's a little bit of a financial and logistical barrier for wholesale nurseries. Yeah. That's great, yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Mhm. Okay. So the comment was just that instead of trying to go for the big boxes directly, they're working with local nurseries to try to encourage them. And then we can get a little bit of industrial peer pressure. If they're getting a lot of business with the natives, then we create that need. That's the last question I have time for. But I'll be here all day, so you can find me later. I'm happy to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Zach Phillips. Zach is the terrestrial invertebrate conservation ecologist at Santa Barbara Botanic Garden, but he recently described himself to me as a conservation naturalist, which is much shorter and I thought so beautiful, so I really like that. Zach primarily studies insects and birds and their relationships to plants. He works with colleagues, students, and volunteers to learn more about plant-animal relationships and how to conserve them. And in my opinion, he has a great talent for getting people interested in things that might otherwise be considered creepy crawlies. So here's Zach.
Thank you, Heather. All right. Hi. I'm going to talk about the Elings Park Transformation Project that Heather introduced. I'm going to focus on how some of the local wildlife here has responded to our planting of about an acre of native plants at the park. And if you haven't been to Elings Park, it's about 1.5 miles west of here. Go after the symposium. And you'll hear, after listening to Doug's talk, you'll definitely hear the influence of his ideas throughout this talk. Is it okay if I call you Doug? I don't want to be too familiar. We just met. All right. So, like Heather mentioned, this project has involved a lot of people, both in the research and in the actual restoration, including volunteers who have done things from digging holes, planting plants, and helping us with our biodiversity surveys. When I say transformation, I'm talking about our conversion of an acre of about an acre of weedy non-native plants into an acre of mostly coastal scrub habitat, which is a critical habitat for a lot of California's plants and animals. And one of our hopes has been that by creating and managing this habitat, we'd attract and support some of the native wildlife, specifically birds and pollinators that depend on it. We planted 28 species, but these are kind of the 5 main characters of the talk, these 5 plants. So they'll be recurring throughout. From clockwise, from top left, California sagebrush, California buckwheat, coyote bush, bush sunflower, and giant wild rye, a big tall grass. And we had 2 questions. Once the plants were planted, we started watching the animals, what animals were visiting the site and how they were interacting with the plants. To answer these 2 central questions, is the transformation working? So is it attracting and supporting the native wildlife? And what are the keystone plants? So what are the major contributors, to use some of the language from the last talk? To answer that first question, is the transformation working? We have been conducting bird and pollinator surveys both on the transformed acre and on an adjacent reference acre that's still just weedy, non-native plants. And all the results I'm going to tell you about today are from spring and summer 2025, March to August. So for the birds, in that period, we saw 8 species only in the transformed acre that we didn't see in the weedy acre, and all 8 are native birds, including the 3 photographed up here, the ash-throated flycatcher, the chipping sparrow, and the wren tit. And then we didn't see any unique species in the weedy acre, but we saw 28 species in both plots. That's that central list of species. Notably, one of the birds we saw just in the transformed acre is a first species record for the park, for Elings Park, the yellow-headed blackbird. And it's probably not due to lack of looking, because Elings Park is a birding hotspot. And one of the people that makes Elings Park a birding hotspot is here today. He'll be one of the panelists, Hugh Ranson. And on his own birding walks at Ealing's, he's seen more rare species records in the transformed plot. So here are a couple examples he posted on iNaturalist, a green-tailed towhee that was hiding in the shrubs, and a common poorwill, which might be enjoying some camouflage from the mulch that we added to the plot. Similar to our bird survey results, our pollinators, there seems to be more native pollinator activity and greater pollinator diversity in the transformed acre than the weedy acre. Some of the pollinator groups we only saw in the transformed acre include masked bees, which is the top left on the blue circle, and these long-abdomened carrot wasps on the bottom left of the blue circle, and also a bunch of snout moths. So to return to that first question, is the transformation working? Based on our surveys this spring and summer, it seems to be working well so far, attracting native birds and pollinators. On to the next question, what are the keystone plants that might be behind the success of the transformation? For the birds, we surveyed a variety of bird-plant interactions, some that you're probably familiar with, like perching or vocalizing, and some you might be less familiar with, like insect thrashing. So if you thinking about Doug's analogy to the sausage of a caterpillar, this would be like if you saw a bird really angry at a sausage and just smashing it. And it might be trying to remove hairs on the caterpillar to make it more edible, or bashing out the gut of the caterpillar if it has toxic plant materials inside of it. I focused on insect gleaning for the surveys, or I'll talk about that mostly today because that's a decent measure of how valuable a plant is as an insect resource to birds. And by insect gleaning, I just mean birds foraging insects or other arthropods like spiders directly off the surfaces of the plants, whether that be leaves, stems, flowers, other surfaces. So in our acre, coyote bush seems to be the keystone plant for insect gleaning birds. There was the most insect gleaning activity on coyote bush and the most bird species observed doing that. And there were a few breeding pairs that were actively doing that. The lower picture shows a female common yellowthroat, a warbler, and her partner were constantly foraging for about 3 weeks this summer for insects for their kind of bumbling fledgling that was following them around. But it's hard to see what specific insects are being foraged. So to get a closer look to see if coyote bush might be an important source of caterpillars, we did caterpillar surveys of coyote bush. And we used a couple methods to survey the caterpillars, but the most effective one in this case was UV light at night, because the caterpillars that blend in during the day really well pop out under the UV light. And so you can see on the left, there's a coyote bush caterpillar kind of blending in well, and on the right, the UV light making it more apparent. We didn't just survey coyote bush for caterpillars. We surveyed 10 species total, 10 plant species. 7 of them didn't have any caterpillars. Coyote bush had the most, with California sagebrush coming in at a close second. And most of the caterpillars on coyote brush are a coyote bush specialist moth, Macaria marcascaria, so its host plant is coyote bush. And if coyote bush hadn't been in the transformation area, then this caterpillar population wouldn't have been there. The adults might have been there, but not the caterpillars. This wasn't, combined, the insect gleaning behavior results and the caterpillar survey results suggest coyote bush could be an important keystone plant for breeding birds, not only in our transformation site, but also in coastal scrub habitats. This isn't really an expected result because coyote bush isn't known, or at least celebrated, as an important food plant of insects for birds. So our results suggest it might be worth exploring this in other coastal scrub habitats in general. And I don't want to inflate coyote bush's ego too much, so I'm just going to mention there are other plants performing other important roles for the birds at the site. And one example is giant wild rye, the very tall growing grass. I think it gets up to about 8 meters tall. Oh, sorry, not 8 meters, 8 feet. 8 feet. Can I still call you Doug? I got that wrong? Yeah, 8 feet. And Hugh is British, and I've been sitting next to him the whole time, so there might have been an absorption of... and this is just an example of some of the birds that perched on giant wildrice. So it attracted flycatchers, sparrows, warblers. All of them used giant wildrice as a perch to look for predators, or to, in the case of the common yellowthroats, to find where their fledgling was. To survey for keystone plants for pollinators, we focused on one pollinator-plant interaction, the most relevant for pollinator events, or pollination events, which is the contact between the insect and the flowers, or the plant's reproductive parts. And California buckwheat was the plant that attracted the greatest diversity and greatest abundance of native pollinators, as you can see in the figure on the right. And this wasn't surprising. California buckwheat is commonly recommended by gardeners and restoration ecologists. It's known as a hub for pollinators in California. So consistent with what people know already. And these are some more photographs from Hugh at the transformation site of a few of the pollinators he saw, mostly bees and wasps, but there are also beetles and flies there as well. And this is my favorite pollinator on buckwheat at the site, the brown tenuca. And it's actually within the same superfamily, I think, as the owlet moths, even though it doesn't look like it at all. It's a day-flying moth, but not a butterfly. I won't get into that now. Here's a little video of it. So the adult's nectaring on the buckwheat, but its host plant is actually giant wildrice. We didn't find any of the caterpillars on giant wildrice, but it might be a situation where we just have to wait another year. So we're going to survey again this year. If anyone wants to volunteer to help do nocturnal UV light caterpillar surveys. So as we continue our pollinator and bird surveys, we're learning more about how diverse plant communities support diverse animal communities. One example of that is a plant I haven't mentioned yet, coast goldenbush, Isocoma menziesii. Hardly got touched by birds this spring and summer, but when it went to seed this fall, became one of the main seed food plants for white-crowned sparrows and some other migrating sparrows. I'm going to briefly mention another study we're doing at the site, which might have some interesting bearing on the caterpillar pupation that Doug mentioned. We haven't really explored this. We're looking at how two different weed-killing methods affect the growth of our native plants, and those being sheet mulching, where you layer mulch over a layer of cardboard, versus tarping. In our case, we're using black tarp to cover the weeds. We've only started assessing the data recently, but based on our first monitoring, the plants in the sheet mulch plots have grown about twice the size of the plants in the tarped plots, and we'll continue working on this throughout the year. Different factors might be causing this, like more and better nutrients in the soil or less death of good microbiota in the soil. And, okay, 3-minute warning. I think I got it. And the Ewing's Transformation Project has also kind of been a keystone project for the garden. It's been a hub of collaborations of all kinds. One of those has been the gallery exhibit that Heather mentioned, currently showing at the garden, which is the result of artists and scientists working together to get birds and plants and bugs on the walls. And we're continuing to train students and volunteers in field methods like insect surveys and bird surveys at Ewing's Park. So it's kind of acting like a mini urban field station. We're also doing a lot of interesting outreach. I don't want to be presumptuous, but I think we're doing the best caterpillar-themed pop-up dance party in Santa Barbara. Thanks, everybody. And the two other leads on the research are pictured here. Dr. Sarah Cusser leading one of the walks that if you want to go on this year, go back to Heather's talk and look at that barcode. And Dr. Stephanie Clark measuring some of the plants. Okay. Questions? Yeah.
How resilient is this? If you guys were to walk away and come back 5 or 10 years later, do you think this little patch would have survived, or would it just go back to what it was?
I will never walk away. No, yeah. No, that's a great question. That's a question that kind of drives some of our decisions. Repeat the question. Zach, you seem neat. Can I be your friend? Yes. So how resilient is this sort of restoration? So if we were to walk away and stop managing it, or at least if the garden were to stop managing it, how resilient would it be? I don't know is the quick answer, but that's part of our calculations when we're choosing projects, and one of the reasons we've involved so much of the community is to make it not just a garden project, but to make it a community project that other people in the community might be able to sustain in the future. But I don't know, if we just walked away right now and nobody managed it at all, I don't know. Good question. Do I get to choose who? Okay, nice. All right. I'll start from the back, very back. Blue shirt. Yeah. I will do that. Maybe. It's like, I think the garden has, great people, as you've seen, that can help think about that question. Oh, okay, so that's an example of they've done fine without management. Did I forget to repeat the question again? She asked, Zach, you seem neat. Can I be your friend? Oh, no, sorry. Who's the next question? Oh, there we go.
Hoping to build resources to be able to get out and support community-driven projects to both do planning, do planting, and then do monitoring over time. And so the idea of getting out to the Carpeting Bluffs and doing some training for volunteers to help monitor is something that we can certainly do.
That sounds awesome.
Last question.
Last question.
I'm interested in stone plants, particularly for landscaping. And I'm thinking, when you talk about coyote bush, which is kind of a big rangy plant, but there's cultivars like pigeon point. Do they have the same thing as that?
So she's asking if two different forms of coyote bush, one's a prostrate form and one's the tall form that I've been talking about, have maybe similar ecologies?
Right.
Yeah, similar value. Yeah, I'm going back to a link to a talk that I cited but didn't quote. There it is. So a talk that Alison Green-Kidder gave for CNPS Marin gets into that exact question. So she kind of studied ecological differences between the two forms. And I think one thing I remember she found was I don't think she looked at caterpillar differences, but she looked at galliform insect differences on the plants. And I think it was the taller form that had twice as many galliform insects. So it suggests there could be other major insect community differences, which would lead to differential value for birds. But yeah, I recommend watching that talk. It's on YouTube. Yeah. Yeah. Oh. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Zach. You're really neat. While I cruise through this, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Alejandro Lemus, who is our horticultural educator at Santa Barbara Botanic Garden. This is like rubbing my head or rubbing my tummy and patting my head or something. I'm like trying to click and talk. Alejandro is our horticultural educator at Santa Barbara Botanic Garden. He has an infectious enthusiasm for native plants that he shares via a variety of classes, workshops, and social media posts. He's done some really fun Instagram videos if you're on Instagram. And I think that Alejandro found the right job because he likes to garden with native plants in his free time, in addition to teaching us all how to do it at work. And he also likes to observe the insects that visit native plants. He has a gift for sharing his expertise in a way that I find welcoming and approachable, and it's demonstrated by his motto, which is that you're not a gardener if you haven't killed at least one plant, or maybe a dozen.
I think I just want to take it off, if that's okay. Yeah. I'm just going to take off the microphone, just like Doug did. I'm sorry, I don't know you, Mr. Tallamy. So thank you so much for having me here today. It's been an exciting morning just hearing about the power of native plants and all the beautiful benefits that they provide. In fact, I'm so inspired. I want to go home right now and plant a native plant, but I can't because I'm here to talk to you about why you should plant native plants. So again, I'm Alejandro Lemus, horticultural educator at Santa Barbara Botanic Garden. And my presentation is about how we can grow resilience, how habitat gardening can help wildlife and communities. So I want to encourage all of us to think about our backyards, our front yards, parking strips, curb strips, whatever you call them. I call them hell strips. Your container gardens, your raised beds with herbs and veggies. And I want you to start to think about how those pocket spaces can help cultivate biodiversity and ultimately cultivate resilience. Because I know resilience is one thing we need yesterday, today, and going forward. How do I switch my slide? There we go. Oh, that's not me. There we go, that is me. So before I go any further, I just want to remind people of the definition of community ecology. So in ecology, a community is a group or association of populations of two or more different species occupying the same geographical area at the same time, also known as a biological community. So to me, if I had to show you a picture to sum that up, this is that picture, where you see humans and plants in conversation. I think oftentimes we, as humans, exclude ourselves from the natural environment, when in reality, we are actually super interlinked, right? We are part of the insects, we are part of the reptiles, we are part of the larger mammals, and the sooner we realize that, the more we can live harmoniously with our native plants. So I want to provide you with a couple stories that you could potentially share with your friends, your families, your neighbors as to why planting native plants are important. And as we've been learning today, one of those stories involves the insects. We've heard a lot about insects and why they're important. Insects represent half of Earth's biodiversity. That is insane. And in fact, 25 to 35% of those insects are herbivorous, meaning that they primarily feed on plants. You know, just take a look at this gray hair streak that's feeding on a buckwheat species. I think every habitat garden needs a species of buckwheat. Take a look at the native bees that utilize manzanita flowers, all sorts of cool insects that are reliant on plants. So if you take anything from today, it's that plants and insects are quite literally feeding the web of life. Oops. Gotta go that way. So at the Botanic Garden, we have a couple of educational principles and narratives, and I hope that you can share these with your friends, your family, your neighborhoods after today. But we like to say that native plants support the web of life. In fact, almost all songbirds are gonna feed their young insects. How do you attract those insects? You have to attract them with the plants. You know, we've been hearing about how plants are gonna attract caterpillars, insects that are gonna feed the web of life. So in fact, over 50% of the diet of many birds is Lepidoptera species. Butterflies, moths, caterpillars, what are the ways you attract them? You have to plant the milkweed plants if you want to see monarch butterflies. So really start to think about what insects you want to attract and what plants you have to plant for that to happen. I'm going up. Yes. So perhaps you have a friend who's not into insects. That's not the way to talk to them. I don't think you should be their friend. But perhaps that person's more of an aesthetic. They want to talk about, you know, the beauty of native plants. This might be another way to buy them into the narrative. Native plants provide us with a sense of place, and they're beautiful. And to me, I really like this value here. It could be a field of California poppies, similar to what you see at the Botanic Garden in the springtime. It could be the feeling you get when you're underneath the redwood trees at the garden. It could be the smells of sages waving from the chaparral and the coastal sage scrub communities. All of those are valid reasons to plant native plants. And one common theme I want to go back to today is that native plants make our communities much more resilient. And I don't want to continue to belabor these points, but I will. Native plants support native biodiversity, as we've been learning about today. They help save water if you're choosing the drought-adapted species after they're established. They're great for erosion control, stabilizing slopes. They combat urban heat islands. And as we've been hearing about with the Ealings Park project, they're incredible for climate-forward land planning. So go native plants. And they're also really great for wildfire adaptations, which we've been hearing is devastating, and they're happening a lot more frequently. But if there's one thing that brings me peace and solace, is that native plants in the landscape has regenerative wisdom that we can always rely on. So to me, that is a lesson that I've learned from the plants and about how they can teach us to be much more resilient. Okay, I figured this out. I have to go up. So I want to call to action here. So native plants are under threat, and they need your protection. Approximately 2,000 of California's native plant taxa are endemic, meaning they're found nowhere else on Earth. That is crazy. Places like the Channel Islands are home to rare and endemic plants that you can't find anywhere else. But I want to call to action, and I want y'all to start to think about how your gardens, your front yards, your backyards can be an oasis for these plants. I think oftentimes we think about horticulture, conservation, gardening to be separate things from each other, but that's not really true. Habitat gardening is conservation. When you choose to plant that rare Dudleya species in a pot in your balcony, that is a powerful act of conservation. When you choose to plant that ethically sourced white sage, that is a powerful act of conservation. So those are steps that we can take to start to build biodiversity and resilience. So as a hotspot for biodiversity, what we do in California really matters. Just take a look at this map here. We have all sorts of things happening. See, I'm gonna walk around. I have to wave my hands, I need to walk around, but take a look at what's happening here. There's so many endemic species that you find on the West Coast. So for that reason, what we do in California really matters. And all of these endemic species are under threat, and they need protection. How can we protect them? We can start to see how our front yards can cultivate native plants. So at the Botanic Garden, we have this vision of seeing 30% native plants in the places where we live, where we work, and where we play. And I think this idea of 30% native plants is something that's brought me a lot of peace, because when you think about replacing your entire lawn, sure, it would be great to do 100% native plants, but you don't have to do that. It can be 30% native plants, and I hope that's something that we can all take tangible actions to work towards. You know, 30% native plants can look different to everyone. 30% native plants, I'm gonna switch my arm here. 30% native plants could be this patch of hummingbird sage at Alice Keck Park Memorial Garden. I hope you visit after today. I'm gonna talk a little bit about what we've been doing at Alice Keck. 30% could be a Dudley in a pot. 30% could be this beautiful patch of Verbena delaminas that are blooming outside of the Goleta Water District on Hollister. 30% native plants could be this beautiful buckwheat in my backyard that brings me so much peace. So I encourage you to think about what are ways you can start to think about 30% native plants. So I hope you're bought into native plants, because now I really want to talk about who are the folks who are planting these plants. How are we making a difference? So one thing I like to say is that as native plants build resilience, as they build habitat, native plants are also cultivating a community. So I want you to think about who are the folks planting these plants. I mean, here we have an image of talented landscapers. These are actually staff members from City of Port Hueneme down in Oxnard who actually helped plant over 150 native plants at Alice Keck Park Memorial Garden as part of the Botanic Garden's landscape transformation project there to install plants that are gonna be super, super essential to Lepidoptera species. I have more images here of that happening. But seriously, I really wanna encourage you to think about when we plant native plants, what are we doing? We're cultivating biodiversity, but you're also cultivating a group of talented landscapers. You know, here we have representatives from the city of Santa Barbara demonstrating how to plant, how to amend the soil. Here we have some folks from a local landscaping company in town, Enviroscaping, showcasing how to prune native plants. Why do we leave the browns? Why do we leave the tans? What is the habitat value of the muted landscape? So there's so many reasons we plant native plants, and one thing I've learned through my work at Santa Barbara Botanic Garden is that we're also cultivating a community of advocates that are gonna further the native plant movement. I really like this picture here. I don't know who's watering those plants, but I'm sure they're super talented and know what they're doing. But this is an example, or this is an image of what Alice Keck Park, the native plant bed, looked like in November 2024 when we installed about 80 hummingbird sage plants. And so I like to say that the first year native plants will sleep, the second year native plants will creep, and then the third year they leap. But this happened after a year. They broke my rule, so I need to come up with a new rule. But this is what 30% native plants can look like. It could be this assemblage of hummingbird sage, deer grass in the background. You know, having these kinds of landscapes in the built environment and in our parks is totally possible. So I hope this is encouraging you to plant native plants. So I want to take a moment to recognize a really special group of people. I've been talking a lot about how native plants cultivate community. So native plants, they build habitat in a community of stewards. So as you've been hearing, the Botanic Garden, over the last few years, we've been offering the California Native Plant Landscaper certification, which I see many familiar faces from that certification in this room today. But for the first time ever last year, we were able to offer this program in Spanish to support 14 amazing community members, landscapers who work in their own business or work for local parks here in town like Ealing's Park. So these are the 14 graduates that received their certification last September. Yes, shout out to them, shout out. And I also want to take a moment to say that it's really the Spanish-speaking landscaping community that's pushing the native plant movement forward, and it's really our job to protect and uplift them with everything that's going on in the world today. So I'm really, really proud of what they've done. So I just want to show you some pictures of what we've been able to do. Again, I'm just sharing a story here with you. Sorry for the lack of words. But this is our last class for the Spanish Landscaper certification when we all met at Santa Barbara Botanic Garden to practice pruning, distribute the certificates because everyone met the requirements. But one thing that kept coming to me was that this was just a celebration of folks having fun and celebrating how plants have had an impact in our lives. Let it be something we're doing as a hobby, something we do for work. We're all connected by plants. And truly, these folks blew me away. I'm so humbled by them. You know, on the last day I said, don't worry, the Botanic Garden will provide food. Alejandro has a $100 budget. Don't worry, don't worry. And all I had to say was that, and these folks showed up with pots of tamales, desserts, all sorts of food that I was not anticipating. So it was just a really great reminder of that native plants brought us here together and that we're all really unified by plants and we can all participate in the native plant movement. And again, just more pictures of our adventures. Here we are at Alice Keck Park, installing some native yarrow plants in between some of the other plants. But again, I just want to show you these pictures because it's a really great example of how we were having open and honest conversations about horticulture and gardening. You know, these folks that otherwise maybe don't have a lot of say in their jobs because they're reporting to a supervisor, they have work to do. This is an opportunity for them to say, hey, Alejandro, let's lay out the plants this way. Or this is an opportunity for someone else like Renee to say, I don't like how they're laid out. Why don't we do it this way? So I really like that it was an open and honest conversation for really talking horticulture and the different ways we can approach horticulture and giving folks the platform to share that with other like-minded students. I don't have much to say about this picture other than the Ealing's Park landscaping staff are badass. Look at those folks. We have Renee pruning some California buckwheat and showcasing to our class, this is how you prune buckwheat. But this is also maybe why you want to save some of the flowers and the seeds because they're feeding wildlife. You know, so this is just a really great example of how native plants are beautiful, but also how dormancy in native plants is beautiful and how we have to start to appreciate the muted colors of the landscape. The browns, the tans, the blacks, they're all beneficial to wildlife. So I want to pivot a little bit and I want to highlight a person that is so special and has brought me so much community here in Santa Barbara, but we talk about cultivating a community of advocates and landscapers, and I just want to say shout out to Liz Barnett, who is in the room today. Hi, Liz. I'm not as nervous because you're here. But I want to say shout out to Liz Barnett, who is Santa Barbara resident. They're a graduate of the California Native Plant Landscaper Certificate Program. They are president of their HOA, retired principal, and they are really taking the lead on their landscaping in their HOA community. You know, here they are. I love this picture of you, Liz. Look at you next to your Pozo Blue Sage. That is so adorable. I took that picture, by the way. But I just want to say shout out to Liz, who's making a difference. You can read about it in the article I wrote here. But truly, Liz is utilizing different ways to harvest rainwater in their community, are adding native plants, and are really making a difference in areas that otherwise feel that it's hard to make a difference sometimes. HOAs and getting people to change that mindset. I'm really happy to have met someone like you. And again, I'm happy to know someone like you, Liz, so thanks. Aw, thank you. So I also just want to conclude my presentation by encouraging you all to grow native plants. You know, I think we're starting to see that this demand for native plants is becoming really high, but the supply isn't quite there. So I want to encourage you to start to think about what are ways that you can utilize your garden to grow native plants, collect cuttings, collect seeds, and make it available for your community. So if you have visited the Botanic Garden recently, and specifically our backcountry area, you might notice this cage of plants, and you're wondering, what is going on down here? This is my, I guess, laboratory where I get up to all my experiments, and when I want to leave my desk, this is where I go hang out. But we are growing native plants in the backcountry for the community. But what I really love about our project, this is our nano nursery, but we're growing native plants with the community. So we're showcasing summer camp participants, the beauty of horticulture, how to grow native plants. We're working with participants of our Pathfinders program. But so again, we really are working to engage the community. So after today, I encourage you to pick up a native plant or two. We have grown some lemonade berry or poppy. You have a choice for you. And I want to say I grew them, but that's not true. We grew them at the nano nursery. We all grew those plants. So I encourage you to take one home today. So just some really great pictures of seedlings and, you know, all the native plants we're growing. It's awesome. It's something that you all can participate in. It's fun. And if you have questions, feel free to find me in the nano nursery. I'm there like 70% of the time, hiding from my responsibilities. So I don't know if I'm at a time limit or anything I've lost. Oh, it's okay. Well, I'm done anyways. So I just want to say, let's get growing. And it starts with us. Thank you. That was amazing. Okay, I did that. So are there any questions? And they better be good questions. No, I'm just kidding. Any questions? It's also bright, so I have a hard time seeing. You in the back, yes. Yeah, so the question is, yes, I have to remember to repeat the question. The question is, do we have any guidance for planting coyote brush or California buckwheat in high fire areas? So as Steve mentioned, the Botanic Garden is working towards developing resources for landscaping for wildfire resilience. If anyone's going to be at the CMPS conference next week, there's a really great workshop that's being offered about landscaping for wildfire resilience. But there are protocols. It all comes down to maintenance. And I can talk with you after today if you want to continue speaking. But I think maintenance is going to be a huge key when it comes to landscaping for wildfire resilience, making sure that you're cleaning out dead material, making sure the plants are being maintained, but also spacing, I'm learning, is a huge, huge consideration. California buckwheat, wonderful habitat plant, maybe not the best plant to have right by your window. So think about spacing. I've learned that spacing is a huge thing. We've also been working closely with the Santa Barbara County Fire Safe Council, so those are folks that may have other resources as well. Great question. Yeah. You, hi. I have many thoughts there. I think if everyone in this room, I have to repeat the question. Oh gosh, what was your question? So the question is, should I plant one plant or should we do block plantings, and is there a major difference? I hope that was your question because I'm going to answer that. But the answer is yes. If everyone planted a native plant in this room, that would be awesome, and my heart would be so content. But if everyone plants a mass planting of California buckwheat or other flowering perennials, that would be awesome. In terms of landscape design and thoughtfully designing for wildlife, I'm starting to learn that instead of just doing one-off species, start to consider block planting or mass planting. You know, definitely encourage you to also visit Alice Keck Park here in town to get some inspiration, but we've utilized, hopefully, a lot of the design principles there, block planting a lot of hummingbird sage, California buckwheat, and really playing with heights of plants. I think one thing we've also learned about today is structure. The three-dimensional structure is also going to be super, super vital for habitat and attracting caterpillars. So block planting and also thinking about 3D structure. And do I have time for one more question? Okay, one more question. Yes. Yeah, so the question is, do we have an algorithm for deciding keystone species or important plants? Is that what I'm understanding? Yeah, so we do try to adhere to this idea of planting keystone plants. So like one thing I've learned from Mr. Tallamy's books is that plants like prunus, willows, quercus, oak trees are going to be super important. So we've definitely have made sure, I think at Alicecac Park that we have some height restrictions where we don't want the plants to get really tall there. But we definitely have added plants like toyon that are going to be great shrubs that are going to support caterpillars, butterflies, and birds. So we have made sure to include some larger shrubs, but there's always room for improvement there. Yeah. All right, I think those are all the questions I can take. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Alejandro. That was super fun. So now that we're all feeling really good, we have a lot of energy, we're going to take a short break. But then we're going to come back and we're going to harness that energy to talk to our panel. So please don't go too far, but we'll see you soon.
Well, good afternoon and welcome back to the 13th Annual Santa Barbara Botanic Garden Conservation Symposium. Thank you for staying around. I'm the other H. Schneider of the Santa Barbara Botanic Garden. My name's Helene Schneider, and I have the honor, distinct honor, of serving as chair of the Board of Directors, the Board of Trustees for the Santa Barbara Botanic Garden. I'm so excited to be able to moderate this incredible panel today. So thank you first to all the attendees here in person, and hello to those online today and into the future. I also want to thank our speakers, Heather, Zach, and Alejandro, and again, thank our sponsors, the Nakashima Rennie family, Blackbird Architects, Christian and Melissa Stepien, Cox Communications, and Newshawk. Can we give them a round of applause, please, for making this happen? So we have about a half hour or so now to literally bring it on home, right? What are we going to do at home, or what I like to say, to be the change you want to see? With so much going on in our chaotic world, no matter whichever way you want to look at it, there are always things that we can do to make our world, our community, our city, our country better. And this is one way. And we're going to literally just kind of take it on home here. We have an amazing panel. We're bringing in some distinct voices here. You've heard from two of them already. Our honoree, and congratulations to Doug Tallamy, to Alejandro Lemus, who you just heard before the break. And I want to introduce also, we have Hugh Ransom, who was mentioned up on the big screen earlier this morning, a Santa Barbara local homeowner who's helping the movement grow by welcoming native plants into his landscape. And Dean Noble, who is the executive director of Ealings Park. We heard a little bit about Ealings Park today, didn't we? And that partnership would not have happened without your leadership. So thank you so much. So like I said, I want to bring it on home. I took maybe quickly go around one tiny little thing that one could do today, tomorrow, this week. To me, I'll bring up one, was change my motion light to a yellow bug light. Something as simple as that, right? So that when it goes on at night, then the moths don't freak out, which I never knew that was even a thing. I'm going to start with you because you're a homeowner. You were mentioned. You have a beautiful, amazing space now. It wasn't always that way. What's your story? How'd you get here? Why are you sitting in that chair right now?
Is this on?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. It's a long story. I started with birds when I've been a birder since I was 12, and during COVID, I decided I was teaching from home and had a little bit of spare time, so I decided to learn the butterflies and the dragonflies, and just became a lot more aware of insects. And then I found out about the insect apocalypse. So I live in a small condo complex. It's only 6 units. And we have a big, on Robin Street, Santa Barbara, only about a mile or so away, a couple of miles. We had a big area out front, about 50 feet square, where we had, if you ever drive down Robin Street, you probably have driven past this huge oak tree that we had growing there. It was about over 100 years old. And it became diseased. We had to take it down, and there was arguments about what we're going to do with this piece of land, and nobody could decide anything. So a couple of years go by, it's just full of weeds. And I put forward the proposal that why don't we just grow natives there? That got turned down. I tried it again, and I said, I will do all the work. We won't have to pay anything for watering after we get things established, and I'll take it on. And so finally, I got the votes out of 6. Yeah, mine was the deciding vote. And so I visited with Scott Pipkin at the Botanic Gardens, and he was great. Really helped me, choose some different plants. And this was about 2.5 years ago now. Put maybe over the years, I put about 30 different native plants in the ground, and it's just taken off. It's going nuts. I'm a big believer in iNaturalist. I just love iNaturalist, and I've been cataloging all the native bugs that have been coming to the yard. And I'm up to about 65 different bees, wasps, beetles, spiders, and I haven't even included the birds in that. So I've been learning a ton, and it's just been so rewarding.
Great, thank you. You had a phrase that I appreciate, and I'm going to ask all the speakers here. Over the years, things happened, right? So it doesn't just happen. It's a cumulative effect, and I think, Doug, you mentioned that in your transformation of your 10 acres. Maybe start with Dean. We haven't heard from you yet at all today, but what, in terms of thinking the first steps, and maybe whether it's Ealing's Park or just thinking in general, whether it's a big landscape, a small space, the resources, what are kind of like the initial thoughts, kind of key strategies we should think about if we want to literally bring it on home?
Sure. I'm Dean Noble, Executive Director at Ealing's Park. One of the first things I did after I got the job was invite Steve Windhager to come hike the park. That's a good first step. There was black mustard over my head. Ealing's Park, Doug, is a 200, can I call you Doug? Okay. It's a private nonprofit park. We don't get any government funding, and half of it is on the site of an old landfill. And the site where the transformation acre is used to be dry farmed for legumes. It had been stripped, destroyed. At one point it was going to be housing development, and at another point it was going to be a Jesuit seminary. It was going to be an event center for a while. Did you guys know that? I've got the press clippings to back it up. Just degraded. So black mustard over my head, and all I could hear as I hiked through it for the first time was, "This is John Palmentary at the site of the Ealing's Park fire." So we brought in Kuyama lamb, we brought in sheep, and it was, 6 years ago it was novel. So my elementary startup steps would be invite Steve Windhager for a hike, bring in sheep. Get rid of the non-natives. They tremble when they hear your boots coming.
So Hugh, we heard your story. Did you start just one little piece, right? But what was your, was there a favorite plant that you wanted? Was there a particular, you needed community support or consensus, right? In terms of where you got started. What was like one of the first things you did to get started?
I ordered some free mulch from the city, and a couple of neighbors helped me get those 2 truckloads of mulch out over the ground to try and smother the weeds. Plants, really just tried a variety right off the bat, but favorites have definitely been the buckwheat. They really attract the native plant bugs, and the not Kenyan sunflower, what's it called? The Encelia.
California sunflower.
California sunflower, and that reseeds, and it just is going crazy, and it attracts so many pollinators. It's amazing.
Great. And then for Alejandro, in terms of resources and planning, maybe first steps to think about.
I think, can everyone hear me? Yes. I think it really starts with forming a connection with a plant. You heard me talk a lot about hummingbird sage. I like to consider hummingbird sage to be my gateway native plant. So I looked at that plant and never looked at the world again the same way. So I encourage you to start to look at and explore plants that you have a connection with, because I think when you form that connection with the plant, everything else makes sense. But in terms of resources about how to get started, I think the Botanic Garden is a wonderful place to visit and just get an idea of what native plants can look like in different settings. We've heard about coyote brush and how it can potentially be unsightly or rangy. I personally love coyote brush, but the beauty of native plant gardening is you can have a manicured aesthetic garden that is still a functional ecological garden, and on the other end of that spectrum, you can have something that is naturalistic, wild habitat. So I think it just really starts with going out, looking at gardens, and getting inspiration.
And Doug, any other thoughts on initial steps?
The initial step starts in your head to decide this is something you want to do. And most people in the country don't garden at all. They hire they hire a lawn service or an arborist. They're busy doing everything else. So I want to address those people too. we've got to increase the number of ecological landscapers, ecological gardeners, so that you can just go out and hire somebody. You don't have to think about it. They will know the right plants. They'll know how to manage it. But making the decision to say, I want to do this in an ecologically friendly way, that's the big step. I do get asked, what is one thing, the most important thing that we all can do? And the answer to that is vote. So after you voted, 80% of us live in cities. They don't have big yards. So what can they do? That's the container gardening that we mentioned a little bit this morning. I will mention on our website, homegrownnationalpark.org, there is a section on container gardening, the best native plants for your eco-region, so you don't have to guess what's going to work in a container, and that makes that part easier. But that involves everybody then. The apartment complex that's just a pile of bricks becomes a resource for pollinators if everybody puts plants on their balcony. So you don't have to own land, and you don't have to be a gardener yourself to make this happen.
Great. And some of you may know I was connected to the city of Santa Barbara for a little while, and while I was there, we had a thing called a drought, like a major, major drought. You would never know over the last month that California was in drought conditions. But to get to Alejandro's point of loving the browns and the greens, and we part of our mantra was gold is the new green, you know. So trying to transform lawns into native habitat. The conversation then was more about drought resistance, and we're trying now to move it towards native plants and water resiliency. I believe the city of Santa Barbara still has, through their sustainability and resiliency division, you can get funding to replace your lawns and put in native plants. You talked about voting. What other kinds of community relationship advocacy things that maybe we should consider? If you can't have sheep in your yard, but you may ask other agencies or communities to get involved. You got involved in your neighborhood, teaching and certification for gardeners in the area. What other kinds of literal grassroots advocacy can we do?
I wanted to ask Hugh, if you think when you had asked for permission to make this garden, if you had said, I want to make a garden, instead of, I want to make a native garden, would you have gotten permission faster?
If I'd said,
I just want to make a garden, I'll do it. Instead of, I want to make a native garden, because there's this,
I think it would have been faster.
Yeah.
And then you sneak in the natives. Is that what happens?
I think it would.
Like, I didn't say that, but that's what it's going to be. You just sort of do it.
No, just call it a garden. I'm going to make a beautiful garden and leave the word native out, and then all the misconceptions can go by the wayside.
Other.
You can come the third Saturday of every month. Where's Sarah? We're going to be doing our meetups. Second Saturday of every month, and we did plein air landscapers at Elings Park at the Transformation Garden last month. This month is going to be a meditation walk. And the last one in December is going to be something I've never heard of before. It's mountain biking and native plants. And we might have pioneered that here first. So come to Elings Park, second Saturday of every month. We've been doing it for 3 years, and we get 25 to 30 people for each session. 10 o'clock.
All right.
In the morning.
Hugh and then Alejandro?
Yeah. We have a little strip, by the side of the road there, and it had some Indian hawthorn, an old, some non-native plant, and they died. So I took those out and I put in lemonade berries there, and also tons of poppies have been growing in there too. It's just a small strip, but just having things, doing something like that just along the roadway. It's fabulous.
Parkway. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Alejandro, any other?
I think taking classes at the Botanic Garden is a great resource just to learn about native gardening and horticulture and how you could potentially start to utilize that in your front yards or container gardens or raised beds. I think also supporting your landscaper to participate in one of the garden's landscaper certification programs is an awesome way, especially if they're lacking native plant knowledge perhaps. But what I like to say is that landscapers, they're not lacking knowledge. I think a lot of that knowledge is dormant, and it's just waiting for the right cultivation for those principles to come to life again. So definitely recommend folks check out the Botanic Garden and what we have to offer as, a horticulture, conservation, and educational resource.
And can you talk also about maintenance part and some of the don't do's, like Roundup, no, right? I mean, that seems like a kind of obvious thing, but I think if you were saying not everyone gardens, sometimes have people come in and do maintaining the yards. You have control over what can and can't be done. Are there some current go-tos or pit holes or, other kinds of things that you, as part of the certification process, you train the gardeners, use this product versus that product, and maybe what are some of those?
That's a great question. I think at the core of our certification, part of the curriculum is really teaching people to understand that a habitat garden is a place where all life thrives. Wildlife, humans, we coexist and thrive together. So part of that is minimizing the use of pesticides, minimizing the use of amendments or fertilizers. So we really try to encourage people to start to think about the garden as something that's living, and our actions can have a huge implication there. So again, I come back to this idea of, again, letting the browns, the muted colors of the landscape exist, because that's very much supporting wildlife. So getting people to understand the habitat value of fruits, of spent seeds, dry inflorescences or flower stalks, that's definitely one thing that I want people to start to admire, that, California, there are seasons. It's the rainy season and the dry season. And we have spring where it's beautiful, but the summertime is just as important for supporting wildlife with flowers that bloom year-round or fruits that feed wildlife. So really getting people to understand that a habitat garden is full of life.
Go ahead.
I just want to add, if you do hire someone, I hear across the country, my gardener, my landscaper won't do that. I said, well, you're the boss. Fire them and hire somebody who will do that. So you're in control. That's the one thing I want to say.
Great. And can we talk a little bit more about the smaller spaces? I mean, City of Santa Barbara, anyway, more than half of its residents are tenants, so they don't own the property. They rent. They might have a tiny, tiny space. We saw the little balcony, plants. What other kind of either keystone species or what can be done in small spaces?
One idea I've had, I don't know that anybody's actually done it, is if you're in an apartment complex, you don't own any of the land. But let's say there's a tree out front. The landlord often says, I don't want to fool with any kind of different gardening. So you say, I will adopt that tree. It'll be my responsibility. I'll put a bed under it. I'll make soft landings. I'll make sure that it's cared for. You don't own it, but you are making a difference in that landscape. And if everybody in that apartment complex adopted a plant outside, it could be a really healthy landscape. Don't know that it's ever been done, but something to think about.
Anything else? Any other thoughts? Small spaces?
Don't forget you can get plants at
Santa
Santa Barbara Botanic Gardens, and they have extensive knowledge there too.
Great. So question was, any small plants you recommend for container gardens?
That's a great question. I encourage you to get creative with wildflowers. There's so many wildflowers that do well in balconies that provide habitat for beneficial insects. There's so many great native plants that are adapted for living in containers. One of the plants that I highlighted in my presentation was our native succulent, the Live Forever or Dudleas, which are unfortunately being actively poached in the wild. There are regulations and laws being put in place to protect them, but that is a plant that is completely decimated in the wild sometimes, and is such a great hummingbird plant. So, if you're thinking about cultivating native plants on a balcony, wildflowers are a great option. We have so many incredible native succulents like Dudlea, or if you're into it, you can cultivate choyas. I stay away from them, jumping cacti, but there's many ways to get creative with native plants in containers.
Great. I want to ask all of you, there's a lot going on in our world, in our country, our city. That seems overwhelming, and native plants just seem so nice. It seems like it's a nice thing to do, but it's more to it than that, right? It's connected to climate change, it's connected to heat islands, but in all the different types of activities that we're concerned about, and how do we incorporate entering native plants into our everyday lives, into everything else that's going on in the world? Is there a way to make that connection, or that you've been able to talk, or volunteers tell you about, or sense of well-being? I just wanted to bring up the bigger context, and I think, Alejandro, you did a really nice job in your presentation on that a little bit. Go ahead, Doug. Do you want to start, or Doug?
The reason we're talking about native plants is because of the biodiversity crisis. when we have an election, you look at the top 10 things people are worried about, and the biodiversity crisis is not on there. So my goal has been to get it on there, raise its priority in our culture, that this is really serious business. We all have to be involved. Still not on that list, but maybe the next election coming on, we'll get there. But that has been, you can't talk about the biodiversity crisis without talking about native plants. So we start with the reason we're concerned, and then we move on to the native plants.
Do you guys know who Oliver Sacks is? They made a movie about his life, Awakenings, with Robin Williams, once upon a time. They published an essay in the New York Times posthumously, and he said there are two things that he found as efficacious for his patients with extreme neurobiological difficulties. He said they were as efficacious as pharmaceuticals. One was music, and what do you think the other one was? Gardening.
The thing about weeding, it's like it's done the moment you do it. It's awesome.
He said he'd bring his people over in a wheelchair, and they'd remember what to do immediately.
Alejandro, do you have any?
I completely forgot where my train of thought is here. But what I will say is that I'm feeling so inspired to be in this room, because one thing we've been talking about is that there's so much power when we harness, the power that's in our front yards, our backyards, our container gardens. So it really just starts with adding a native plant. But for us at the Botanic Garden, part of this, a lot of our programs are informed by this behavioral change model and how you get people to change their behavior. Well, it doesn't start with telling people you're doing it wrong, you need to change that. It's really about getting people to recognize that there is an issue to begin with and make them aware of it. So I think what we strive to do at the Botanic Garden is bring youth in from different schools to start to appreciate nature and make that initial connection. And when you start to do that from a very young age, these are things that are already embedded in the minds of youth, or what we consider them the next generation of conservation stewards. So I think it's important that that's embedded from a very young age, just making folks aware of an issue and connecting them with nature.
And Hugh, it sounds like it's a neighborhood building activity, right? So it's connecting your neighbors together, perhaps?
No.
No? Oh, okay. I tried. Could it be? I don't know.
A couple of them express interest, and and I try and educate them a little bit and send emails out. But I
bet in the spring your yard is gorgeous, and people look at the flowers. There you go.
The poppies just go nuts in the spring. It's going to be an incredible spring. But one thing I encourage people to do, it's my big deal is bringing the insects in, and what I tell my friends is, plant it and they will come. And
but do people? So how do we say bugs are good? Like, I mean, how do you?
We start by not calling them bugs.
Okay.
A bug infects your computer. It makes you sick. We call them insects.
Any other, but yeah, because you think about, well, I don't want these flying pests or bugs, so just vernacular, the wording is important, talking about birds, talking about flowers, right?
Well, and I think, Doug spoke to it very well in his presentation, that without bugs, we're done for. Without insects, sorry, we're done for.
Yeah.
They're what holds up all the ecosystem.
Yeah. Well, and there's been a lot of research also about heat islands, about environmental justice policy. So thinking about native plants and repurposing an area or a neighborhood with more native plants or drought-resistant or plants can also help the public health of the community and the neighborhood itself, and the biodiversity of that piece. So I think that's another way of making that connection. And then you multiply that in issues about climate change and other kinds of impacts that we've had over time, because it seems so overwhelming. And so then, a little balcony might mean something. But the other question we brought up earlier, locally sourced genetic material, genetic fidelity, like these complex words that are important, but maybe hard to communicate with the general public. And so not only do we want drought resistant, not only do you want native, but you want genetically sourced placed from your immediate area. What are some ways to try to have the general public kind of understand the importance of that? Yeah.
Well, I'd like to transfer that responsibility to the nurserymen themselves. That's what they're going to sell. All the public has to do is go buy those plants. If the nurseryman's selling plants from New York here in California, that's on them. Otherwise, you're asking the public to be more knowledgeable than they want to be right now. So we in other words, we have to make it easy.
Right.
I agree with that sentiment. I worked in a nursery for many years as a propagator, and if you visit Santa Barbara Botanic Garden, we have the 805 initiative, which really advocates for thinking local and planting plants that are not only native to California, but native to your local watershed. So if you visit the Botanic Gardens nursery, you'll see a sign that talks about the 805 initiative, where the plants have been cultivated from, and why it's important to think about the provenance or location of where plants are from. Because native plants are great, as we've established today, but if you can get close to home and start to think about the local genetics of plants, those plants that are, let's say, native to Mission Canyon or the Mission Canyon watershed are just better adapted to the local climate, the soil conditions, but most importantly, they have co-evolved with the local pollinator networks. So native plants are great, but starting to think about local genetics is even better. And again, I concur with what Doug just mentioned. It really is about the nurseries putting that information out there and making it accessible and making it an available choice for people to purchase, right? So starting to think about, well, I want a toyon shrub that was grown from seed that you find in Mission Creek or one of our local watersheds. So it's really up to the nursery and places like the Botanic Garden to provide some of that interpretation about why local genetics is important. So it is an option for you to take a look at and learn more about at the Botanic Garden.
Great. So we have just a few minutes left. I'm going to do one last quick round, start with you, Dean, on just one last pearl of wisdom before we all leave here. No pressure. But if there's one thing that just wasn't, or maybe you just want to repeat something that you thought was really important.
Come visit the Transformation Acre. That is, it's up on the, do you guys ever, who's not been to Ealing's Park? It's okay, no shame. 230 acres, it's up on the mesa. You ever see the paragliders? That's Ealing's Park. And you can come in, we have a variety of entrances to the Calle Mantia entrance at the top, and then it's a straight shot to the Transformation Acre. Come check it out. We've had 3 winters. Gopher baskets, weeding, a lot of tending, but no irrigation.
Great.
So
if an old landfill can do it, so can we, right?
And at sunset, spectacular. The sun setting over the ocean, the Channel Islands, the paragliders, and in 3 weeks we'll have the sheep back.
There you go.
Not in the Transformation Acre, though.
There you go. Hugh, just briefly, go ahead.
2 things, very briefly. I'll go back to plant it and they will come. Second thing, I encourage you to look on iNaturalist and plug in 1914 Robbins Street. That's the front house where I live, where the area is, and just look at the incredible diversity of creatures that have been coming to this yard in the last 2.5 years.
Thank you.
Very quickly. What I will say is just continue gardening, and if you don't garden, start to do it. It's really fun. There's no shame in killing plants. You're a gardener if you do. And horticulture is part science, part art, but also part experimenting. So you're always learning something new. That's what I really love about the work I do in the native plant world and at the Santa Barbara Botanic Garden is that native plants there's always something to learn from the plants. So I encourage you all to start to look at them as teachers.
And Doug?
Okay, even more briefly, personal responsibility. We all need healthy ecosystems. It's not optional. So we all have a responsibility to help them sustain healthy ecosystems, replace them. So think about what you can do to help that move forward.
Great. So as you know, the best time to have done something that has a lasting impact was yesterday. The next best time is today. So I want to thank our panelists. We can give them a round of applause, please. Dean, Hugh, Alejandro, and Doug. Thank you so much. I want to thank everyone here today, both in person and online, and this will be living out in the cloud somewhere, so anyone can get back to it another part of in the future, or repeat something if you wanted to hear about it again. Thank you for being part of this conversation, for showing up in support of biodiversity. I again just want to thank our generous sponsors for making this happen today. And all this, actually, first off, if you're on staff at the Botanic Garden, if you could also raise your hand and thank the staff. They're amazing. Thank you. And thank you to all our volunteers who help the staff, but our sponsors for today, the Nakashima Rennie family, Blackbird Architects, Christian and Melissa Stepien, Cox Communications, and Newshawk. You don't need to do everything, you just need to do something, right? And supporting biodiversity begins right where we live, right at home. Choose your native plants, enjoy it, it's beautiful, it has a sense of hope. That's what I really love about being part of the Santa Barbara Botanic Garden. Do think about becoming a native plant steward, and I'm sure there's information, I know there's information on the website. Thank you so much for for being here today, and thank you again to all the speakers. And Steve, do we go to you, or we're just done?
We're done, but take a native plant on your way out. Alejandro and his team has grown those plants for you, and so please take either a lemonade berry or a poppy, or if there's enough left.
You don't
Or
drink
both.
lemonade from the lemonade berry, I don't think so. But until you have a lemonade berry or a poppy on your way out, if you're here in the audience. And thank you so much.